Chapter 1721. Rocher became a true god. Margaret lay down on a rocking chair in a side hall. She was dressed in a bright red wedding gown with matching embroidered shoes and heavy makeup. There was a smirk on her face. Her gown had been made of blood silk, the kind that, when peeled off cocoons and thrown into the air, would not fall to the ground even after several years. It was extremely light and was considered a top-level material for making chain-type weapons. Any treasure made from this material would definitely be listed on the Universe Spirit Tablet. Such a coveted material was made into a gown Margaret was only going to wear once. Each woman's pursuit of marriage was different. Lavender never cared for a title and couldn't understand Margaret's desire for such a grand wedding ceremony. Aura, meanwhile, was content in quietly staying by Zen's side to pray for his safety. So long as Zen reached his goals, then she would be happy, and even if he failed, she would not regret. It was mostly Letitia and Margaret who often argued with regards to the title of being Zen's wife back in the lower world. The matter had already been decided long ago and there was no more conflict between them. However, Letitia couldn't help but still feel a bit jealous. Her sadness might not be that obvious to outsiders, but Jeffrey knew his own mother well enough to notice her strange temper. However, he didn't know why her mother was unhappy. Not long after, several rays of light shot towards the sky and blossomed into numerous fireworks that illuminated the entire breaking cloud world. It seemed that the wedding ceremony was going according to plan. Just as it was beginning, an extremely sharp aura suddenly surged out from the depths of the breaking cloud world. Swoosh! A white beam of sword radiance suddenly pierced through the sky, hitting a star that was at least 300 million miles away. The sword radiance did not weaken at all despite hitting the star and continued to rise instead until it reached the dome of the evolutionary universe. It was only after it cut into the sighing wall for about 1,000 feet did it finally dissipate. This dome had once been broken by Murphy. However, after being damaged, the sighing wall had the ability to gradually heal itself. It was very much like animal skin and a thick scar would be left behind where it was hit. The guests, who were originally in a state of jubilation, were quickly plunged into silence with the appearance of this sword intent. There was no doubt that this sword strike was far beyond the capabilities of a Supreme Lord. Those who were a bit confused at what was going on immediately felt panicked. Could it be that another strong enemy had come to invade the universe once again? Zen stood in the center of the stage. What a strong sword intent. It's coming from Rocher's cultivation place. Supreme Lord Sky from the celestial position shouted. The panic then quickly melted off everyone's faces and was replaced with anticipation. The moment the godly geniuses returned from the divine refinement forbidden land, they all entered closed-door seclusion, except for Nathan, who was sent to fight against Maha. These godly geniuses, lotus flowers, were all in full bloom and were no longer limited by the heavens. Since all of them were world lords, they were technically only one step away from becoming true gods. However, this step was extremely difficult. There were too many world lords in the divine land that had comprehended the godly ways, since they were all ordinary creatures unrestricted by the heavens. The number of godly geniuses wasn't small, but it was extremely rare for them to be able to condense their own godly tiles and become true gods. Those who were able to become true gods mostly relied on the godly tiles that past true gods had left behind. It was understandable for these godly geniuses to seize the opportunity to cultivate in seclusion in order to attain a breakthrough. Condensing a godly tile was going to be extremely useful in fighting against the sacred race. However, both Win and Master Feng knew that what these youngsters wanted to achieve was impossible to accomplish in just a short period of time. Nobody would have ever imagined that only a year later, one of the godly geniuses would succeed in condensing his own godly tile. From the sword radiance emerged a figure that shot out of the depths of the breaking cloud world. The figure circled the air once before rushing towards the breaking cloud mountain. Zen smiled and followed in pursuit. It wasn't just him. All Supreme Lords present also flew into the air and followed. The other World Lords and Grand World Lords wanted to go too, but they were all in the middle of Zen's wedding ceremony and it would seem rude if they just left so suddenly. In just a few moments, the figure had already reached the summit of the breaking cloud mountain and was already headed straight for Zen. It really is Rocher. Such a powerful momentum. He's truly condensed a godly tile. His lifespan is now limitless and he can travel freely in the divine land. The Supreme Lords all murmured in envy. This kid who used to just practice the sword had now become an existence they had to look up to. All these Supreme Lords held high positions and understood the importance of longevity. An endless lifespan meant unlimited possibilities. They were blessed with long lives, but they knew that they would all one day enter the 5 aging processes and once again enter the cycle of reincarnation. Rocher, congratulations, Zen declared happily. Rocher's aura had noticeably gone a tremendous change. There was a momentum emanating from his body that mostly originated from the countless living beings within his inner world. In truth, his momentum was already present the moment the living beings came into existence within his inner world. However, he had been unable to sense this supposed momentum back when he still did not have a godly tile. "Thanks," Rocher replied, also pleasantly surprised. He never expected the process of condensing his godly tile to be so easy. Looking around, Rocher quickly noticed the small crowd that gathered at the foot of the Breaking Cloud Mountain. "I just found out about your wedding day, so I was eager to break through and attend it. However, I was in such a rush that I didn't have the time to prepare a gift for you. I'm so sorry." Although he was in closed-door training, the numerous announcements from the Roaring Tokens reached him. Today, hundreds of congratulatory words had echoed all throughout the universe for Zen and his marriage. "Never mind that, Rocher. The fact that you are able to break through and become a true god is the best gift of all." Zen laughed. The other Supreme Lords were also quick to give Rocher their congratulations. Meanwhile, Margaret, who was still covered in her red bridal veil, pouted in displeasure. She didn't care whether or not Rocher broke through. All that mattered to her now was that he had obviously upstaged her grand wedding day. As she sulked, someone from the crowd shouted, "Good. 2 happy events in one day. How wonderful." Somehow, that made Margaret feel a bit better. Rocher soon took his seat and the wedding ceremony continued. Half a month after the wedding ceremony ended, 13 Supreme Lords of the evolutionary universe, together with Rocher who had just recently become a true god, Zen, the ancestral dragon, and the 9 genuine dragons all entered the genuine dragon world. The genuine dragon world was not a world within the evolutionary universe. Rather, it was an independent supreme world quite similar to the Purple Power world, only many times larger. The sounds from the Roaring Tokens also could not reach here. Basically, the genuine dragon world was Mike's gigantic spirit beast bag. When the 9 genuine dragons' physical bodies were destroyed, they escaped by attaching their souls to the furnace. Murphy had already planned this early on, just like how he planned for the sorcerer race's invasion. However, Mike was able to turn the tables against him and use the 9 dragons to lead Zen to the path of martial arts. Now that the sacred race had been defeated, it was now time to clear the genuine dragon world. Chapter 1722, Swallow the Pill. Each holy being had their own style of raising the contractual beasts. For instance, Holy J had thrown the black weasel into his inner world and made it sleep. Then, he used the cross-world Thurgy to summon it whenever he needed its help. However, different creatures grow in different ways. There was the genuine dragon that belonged to a large race, which was completely different from the black weasel that grew up free on its own. It was why Mike had created a place that served as a resting space for the genuine dragons when he constructed his inner world. In addition, he also used the place as the spirit beast bag. From the genuine dragon race, many other related races had emerged as well, such as the dragon lineage human race. The genuine dragon was considered a kind of super legendary beast, but the strongest individuals were true spirits. A fully grown, adult ancestral dragon could be considered a true spirit. Now, the powerful warriors of the evolutionary universe had entered the genuine dragon world along with Zen, which quickly caused a huge uproar. The mystery of the 9 dragons at that time was a huge mystery to ordinary living beings, but the genuine dragons were already aware of the conspiracy. That conspiracy had been arranged by a 5-clawed black dragon from the genuine dragon world. Back then, it was thanks to Murphy's help that the 5-clawed black dragon had managed to kill the 5-clawed golden dragon and his 8 brothers. However, the genuine dragon world didn't directly intervene in the war between the 2 universes and instead, simply paid close attention to whoever won or lost. Of course, the 5-clawed black dragon hoped that the sacred race would win. The genuine dragons were just the contractual beasts of the holy being, and they weren't born in the universe. Thus, the contracts that had been signed in the past would lose their effectivity when the evolutionary universe was destroyed and Mike died. The 5-clawed black dragon became free and was then able to travel to the divine land. The 5-clawed black dragon thought that it was a pity that the final outcome of the war was way worse than he had expected. When he learned that the sacred race had been defeated, he realized that the real trouble was yet to come. But since he was a contractual beast, he couldn't leave the genuine dragon world without Mike's permission. There was nowhere to flee, so the dragon could only gather other race members to guard the area with their lives on the line. The cyan dragon had created the most powerful array in the genuine dragon world. Moreover, there were even 3 top-ranked Supreme Lords including Supreme Lord of Oracle, Supreme Lord of Original Sin, and the head of the Celestial Position race among the dozen or so Supreme Lords who went with them. Furthermore, they were also accompanied by the newly advanced True God, Rocher, and the Ancestral Dragon. It was no doubt that such a powerful force was capable enough to start a universal war. Therefore, it came as no surprise when the genuine dragon race was swiftly defeated and not all of the 40 genuine dragons were on the 5-clawed black dragon's side. Back then when the 5-clawed black dragon attacked, many of the genuine dragons did not know the internal causes, and by the time that they had regained their senses, 9 of the dragons had already died. Although the genuine dragons were displeased by the 5-clawed black dragon's actions, there was nothing they could do. It wasn't long before they got defeated, and nearly 20 genuine dragons gave up on resisting. After the group of warriors entered the genuine dragon world, it just took them 7 days to kill the 5-clawed black dragon. They even had 4 days out of those 7 days to rest. It was also Rocher's first time to showcase his strength in that battle. He had only used one sword attack to kill the 5-clawed black dragon in the battle in the genuine dragon world. Only after the rebellion of the genuine dragon world had been pacified, did the evolutionary universe finally become peaceful. However, this was only the beginning for godly geniuses like Zen and Rocher. After returning to the evolutionary universe, Win once again summoned Rocher. Back in the war between 2 universes, Win had only his head left. After the body self-detonated, the inner world in his belly was completely destroyed. Although Win had once again condensed a body and looked no different from an ordinary person, he had already lost his godly tile in the cultivation base of a true god. Though his soul was still powerful, it was destined that he would never be able to achieve anything in the future. Thus he could only lead a mediocre life in the evolutionary universe. Rocher said his goodbyes to Zen after his talk with Win. Half a month later, he followed Win's instructions and ascended into the Divine Land. However, Zen was confused at Rocher's slightly ambiguous words when they had parted. What Zen didn't know was that Rocher's mission was even greater than his. Thus, they would probably never meet again after his trip to the Divine Land. Many years later, a major event had transpired. The 128 heavenly destinies had all appeared. Many races also redivided their forces, and perhaps as the compensation to the Humanity Alliance, their force had 13 Supreme Lords. With just the number of Supreme Lords alone, the Humanity Alliance could be considered the strongest power in the entire universe. As for Yolanda, she had obtained an extremely powerful heavenly destiny and became the 4th top-ranked Supreme Lord in the evolutionary universe. The other 3 top-ranked Supreme Lords included Supreme Lord of Oracle, Supreme Lord of Original Sin, and the head of the Celestial Position race. In addition, the Demon Knight race and the Ogre race also received generous rewards. On the contrary, the Blessed Buddha land was slowly on the decline. Meanwhile, the 4 great clans of the thoughtless minds were bestowed with inheritances left behind by the disciples of the Holy Being. Their goal was to help the evolutionary universe, and now that the threats of the sacred race were gone, they no longer needed to expand. Thus, they did not fight for the crown of destiny but instead, even gave others several crowns of destiny. In that period of time, Zen spent his hours cultivating in seclusion and enjoyed a peaceful life with his girls. The time flow rate in the Divine Land was different from that in the evolutionary universe. Zen actually knew that once he stepped into the Divine Land, he had to spend a lot of time there before he could return to the evolutionary universe. It was known that after having cultivated to reach the level of true gods, time would be in a limitless state. The length of time such as 1,000 years, 10,000 years, millions of years, or even billions of years did not matter to a true god because they never aged. However, Letitia, Aura, and even Jeffrey were different from Zen. Their lifespan was limited. If Zen decided to go to the Divine Land and stay there for a long period of time, he would only be greeted by the piled bones of his loved ones. The strongest enemy of all creatures inferior to the true God was time. Not even Supreme Lords could escape its clutches. However, not long after, Zen found a method to resolve this problem in the Fairy Palace. 4 years after Rocher had left the evolutionary universe, Zen swallowed the emotion-closing pill he had obtained from the Fairy Palace. Even though Saul had warned him that he could not consume the pill unless it was absolutely necessary, he still swallowed it. Now, Zen lagged behind other godly geniuses. Except for Lone, who was not that talented, the lotus flowers of Xenia, Nathan, Lucille, and the other godly geniuses had all bloomed fully. Moreover, half a year ago, a bolt of lightning was charged out from the secluded cultivation place that Xenia stayed in and had created a miraculous view. Even though Xenia had yet to condense the godly tile, she had probably made a considerable breakthrough. Perhaps she would be the second godly genius to become a true god, only second to Rocher. However, Zen was not truly a godly genius as his lotus flower had yet to fully bloom. It wasn't that Zen was inferior to the other godly geniuses because he didn't have great talents and a solid foundation. The reason he couldn't make a breakthrough was most likely related to his inner world. After all, the other godly geniuses all cultivated life vitality, and Zen's chaotic energy was fundamentally different from the life vitality. Therefore, no one could guide him in his path of cultivation, he could only rely on his own comprehension. Helpless, Zen could only use the emotion closing pill to break through the godly genius shackles. The moment Zen had swallowed the emotion closing pill, he immediately felt a strong presence rush into his mind. The facts proved that Saul's warning was right. Since the emotion closing pill was a 7 times refined pill, it was a spiritual object itself. When Zen had got it a few years ago, it had actually quietly condensed its own consciousness. What happened was, the pill actually wanted to possess Zen's body shell. Fortunately, Zen's gold-fighting soul was extremely tough, and with the Emperor's soul imprint in his soul, he was able to release a strong soul pressure to gradually suppress the emotion-closing pill's consciousness. Then again, the dangers of the soul battle weren't any less than the dangers he had faced before. It was because of that very battle that Zen had been unconscious for nearly half a month and had only woken up again slowly with the help of the celestial position race. When Zen had just regained his consciousness, his soul was still quite weak. However, he discovered that his soul had more imprints. Upon closer look, he saw that there were small, pale golden swords in the center of the Emperor's soul imprints. Chapter 1723, Ripping Consciousness. The Emperor's soul imprint was initially a method used by Holy J to cultivate his soul. Such a method of cultivation was extremely powerful. When the soul's power was released, the Emperor's soul imprint could release a pressure that could dominate other people. The powerful pressure released by the Emperor's soul imprint was even stronger than the Great Dominance technique. Even if the opponent was stronger than the user could simply disrupt the opponent's mind. If the opponent's strength was on par with the user's, then the user could suppress their opponent. Ultimately, if the user was stronger than their opponent, then they could directly make the opponent yield without any combat. The warrior who practiced the Emperor's soul imprint could achieve victory without the need for a physical battle. However, that particular kind of aura didn't match with Zen's personality. After all, he wasn't a particularly insolent person. He never wanted to look down on people, especially innocent ones. Nevertheless, for achieving the gold-fighting soul in the divine refinement forbidden land, Zen had no other choice. He had already entered the mind-refining tower. After all, the soul cultivation method given by Holy J was the only method for him to improve his soul. Zen's consciousness continuously observed the soul in his mind. The small swords and the Emperor's soul imprints interacted with each other. Suddenly, they released a golden light. The strange events made Zen curious about the changes that had occurred in his soul. Wasn't that the emotion-closing pill he used was to help him comprehend the emotion-closing godly way? How could it cause such a change to his soul? He wasn't aware of such side effects. Curiosity enveloped Zen and made him want to do something. As excitement got the better of him, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. His vision went black, and he almost fainted again. At that moment, his soul was abnormally weak. Even though Win had personally nurtured Zen's soul, it would still not be possible for him to recover so quickly. Win only had his soul left. However, his true God soul was far more powerful than the souls of the Supreme Lords. Additionally, his methods were also many times more profound. He knew Zen's importance to Mike, so he naturally used his last bit of power to help him. Although Zen's soul injuries were severe, with Win's help, it only took him almost a month to recover from his injuries. The second day after his soul had fully recovered, Zen found a secluded valley. With a relaxed expression, he sat on a boulder within the valley and tightly closed his eyes. Zen could not measure the power of the 7 times refined pill. However, the emotion-closing pill had tortured him to death. Therefore, the little golden swords that it had left behind on his soul could not possibly be mere decorations. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Calmness enveloped Zen as he closed his eyes and entered a meditative state. Suddenly, the power in his soul also began to emerge. The sound of peaceful birds also began to echo in the valley. Additionally, the tranquil blow of the wind through the grass around was also reflected in Zen's mind. Emperor's soul imprint. Zen did not know how to activate the small golden swords in his soul. All he could do was to release the immeasurable power of the Emperor's soul imprints. The moment Zen activated the Emperor's soul imprints, a strong soul force reverberated through the entire valley. The valley that Zen found was located in a relatively remote area of the breaking cloud world. To avoid any disturbances, Zen had to stay away from those cities. He needed to settle far from any other warriors or humans. Seclusion was considered the primary defense of his valley. However, as the most prosperous supreme world of the celestial position race within the breaking cloud world, there was almost no wasteland. Even within a radius of 1,000 miles, there were still many small towns and villages. Civilization was still not that far from Zen's value. The aura of Zen's soul suddenly spread out and scattered in all directions like a flood. The valley had blocked the aura of Zen's soul to a certain extent. However, a portion of it was still able to escape and spread out. All of a sudden, the dominant aura had affected the nearby creatures. The snakes and insects around the valley were greatly frightened as they ran in all directions. The mortals within 1,000 miles all felt dizzy and felt inferior. Those without strong willpower couldn't help but kneel down. And this was a small portion of Zen's soul power. The pressure he released was only 40%. Just as he activated the Emperor's soul imprints, a strange scene appeared. Zen couldn't help but grow even more curious. The little golden swords on the surface of his soul began to rotate slowly. As they continued to spin, the little golden swords even began to move on the surface of his soul. Their movements were similar to the fishes that swam at a river. The little golden swords were extremely flexible and felt very much alive. Are these little golden swords also alive? Zen was dumbstruck since he thought that such a thing was impossible. After all, those small golden swords were the same as the Emperor's soul imprints. All of them were just imprints left on his soul. However, after the little golden swords moved for a while, they all pierced towards the Emperor's soul imprints. The little golden swords actually merged into the Emperor's soul imprints. At that moment, it seemed that the swords were indeed alive. However, the next events quickly convinced Zen to deny the idea. The Emperor's soul imprints shrank rapidly, while the small golden swords continuously grew larger and larger. The small golden swords didn't merge into the Emperor's soul imprints, but instead, absorbed the Emperor's soul imprints. The speed at which they swallowed the Emperor's soul imprints was extremely fast. As time flew by, the Emperor's soul imprints continuously shrunk. Not long later, the fist-sized Emperor's soul imprints had turned into the size of a walnut and then into the size of a cherry. Soon, they were only the size of a sesame seed and then was completely swallowed up by the golden swords. As for the small golden swords, they grew in size by 10 times. After they devoured the Emperor's soul imprints, the small golden swords stopped midair and floated silently on the surface of Zen's soul. What is going on? Doubt was written all over Zen's face. His expression grew even more cautious. He was not sure if the recent changes were good or bad. The Emperor's soul imprints that he exhaustively cultivated in the mind-refining tower had truly disappeared. All his hard work for the Emperor's soul imprints was suddenly devoured by the small golden swords. With his mind continuing to wander, Zen once again circulated his soul force. Without the Emperor's soul imprints, the small golden swords began to move again. The small swords began to flow rapidly on the surface of his soul. The small golden swords were as fast as hungry sharks. As the golden light flowed, Zen's eyes also flashed. At the same time, a strange sensation overcame him. He felt like his soul continuously escaped him. Additionally, his senses began to disappear. Zen's eyes were also icy cold, and no longer contained even the slightest trace of emotion. I understand now. The emotion-closing godly way is actually closely linked to the soul. It unpredictably affects my soul. This emotion-closing pill is indeed the most critical link in the emotion-closing godly way. Zen silently thought in his heart. However, he still had a silent and cold expression on his face, without the slightest bit of excitement or joy. Indifference was reflected in his eyes. Previously, Zen had relied on the malicious aura to suppress his emotions whenever he activated the emotion-closing godly way. However, that was only an unorthodox method. Even the malicious aura could not completely cut off his emotions. It was because the malicious aura originally contained the emotion of wrath. In the end, the emotion-closing godly way still needs me to cultivate the soul. After all, the soul is the source of the 7 emotions and 6 desires. With this emotion-closing pill, can I be considered to have just entered the godly way? Zen muttered with a cold expression. He then reached out a finger to touch his space ring and took out a long sword. With his explosive strength, he slashed the sword in the air and then pointed it at the sky. A bit of sword intent condensed on the surface of the long sword. The sword intent gathered made the long sword glimmer faintly. The bit of sword intent was only the size of a needle. However, it somewhat constantly shimmered around the tip of the sword. Condensing sword intent, Zen said coldly as he meticulously observed. At that moment, his emotions were completely gone. As such, he naturally didn't have much of an expression on his face. Under the influence of the emotion-closing godly way, both of Zen's negative and positive emotions had dissipated. Not a single sentiment could be felt by him. Woo, woo, as the sword intent continued to condense, the silver light it emitted also became stronger. The light grew even brighter as time went by. It was as if a star had formed on the tip of the ordinary long sword. A brilliant light glimmered at the pointy end. It's still not enough. To step into the emotion-closing godly way, one has to let go of all their emotions. Those small golden swords did indeed cut off my grief, my happiness, and other emotions. However, I'm not really leaving everything behind, Zen muttered as he stared at the silver light emitted by the sword intent. At that moment, Zen's heart continuously pounded at a fast pace. He suddenly thought of something and raised his eyebrows. I finally understand, he said with a cold tone and a blank expression. Even if I have cut off all my emotions, I still have my own consciousness. So the ultimate comprehension into the emotion-closing godly way should be. At that moment, the small golden swords on the surface of Zen's soul moved even faster. As they continued to rotate, golden sword light shot out from Zen's eyes. It even seemed like Zen's pupils turned into brilliant stars. Swish, 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 the sword light that was only emitted from his eyes had directly penetrated the mountains within the valley. All that was left was a thin line of sword marks. The destruction it caused was catastrophic. That was the power of Zen's gaze. It is ripping consciousness. Zen's strike shot straight towards the sky. The strike of his was the same as the strike of Rocher's. Both of their strikes were comparably powerful. However, Rocher's strike was intense and powerful, while Zen's strike was decisive and sharp. Chapter 1724, Replacement. Zen completely forgot about himself with this slash. To him, everything in the world was moving away from him. Nothing seemed constant, he felt some sort of distance with everything around. Only the sword intent remained. It was a cruel strike that even he had forgotten about himself. As his sword flashed out, a light appeared out of it. Zen stood rooted to the spot. If he were to face the enemy head-on, he would be easily defeated because of the obvious reason that he couldn't even move a limb in this motionless state. Such was the essence of the emotion-closing godly way. The ripping consciousness was a deciding factor of life and death. Swoosh, the sword that Zen thrust towards the sky did not have much impact. But the 2-inch-wide sword light shot straight into the sky, advancing at an extremely fast speed into the depths of the universe. Soon, the small white sword light pierced through the first star, leaving a gaping 2-inch-wide hole in between. For a star that was tens of thousands of miles in diameter, a 2-inch-wide hole hardly made a dent. The star did not even tremble, as if it did not feel anything. However, not long after the sword light left the star, it slowly began to sway. The slight sway created countless ripples across its surface. There were quite a few spirit transformation realm martial artists cultivating on this star. They were all confused about the sudden movement of the star. Quickly they transformed themselves into light beams and vanished. Boom! As soon as they vanished, the star shuddered and slowly began to collapse. But the stream of light didn't stop after piercing through the star and continued to move up. However, no one in the universe noticed its existence and the flurry of activities it created. After all, this tiny bit of sword light was insignificant compared to the humongous universe. However, the amount of power that was packed into this little light was unimaginable. The light kept piercing through various stars. Despite its increasing ascent, its power and brightness did not dim at all. Finally it pierced through the sighing wall. Rocher's sword had left a huge gap that was 1,000 feet deep on the sighing wall. However, Zen's sword was much sharper and more penetrating. It went as deep as 30,000 feet into the sighing wall. When the ray of sword light finally disappeared, Zen's consciousness gradually returned. Although he was still recovering from the haze, he could slowly move himself around. His eyes became sharp and shone with intelligence. The corner of his mouth curled up slightly, and a look of satisfaction appeared on his face. After comprehending the ripping consciousness, he had a deeper understanding of the emotion-closing godly way. Rumble. Suddenly, the mountain wall that was looming ahead of him collapsed. In a blink of an eye, the giant structure was reduced to a heap. Zen hardly lifted a finger to do this feat. The golden light that emitted from his eyes was enough to slice the mountain into pieces. Now, if Zen activated those small golden swords, he could really kill with his eyes. Abruptly, Zen could hear a strange buzzing sound, as soon as the mountain collapsed. As he was trying to locate the source of the sound, his eyes caught some movement behind the heap. A lotus flower slowly rose from behind the collapsed mountain wall. The lotus flower. Zen was stunned seeing the revered flower. The lotus flowers of the 9 godly geniuses had all bloomed fully, except Zen's. Zen could not figure out the reason behind it. The truth was, once their lotus flowers bloomed, they became complete godly geniuses. Only then would they have the ability to cross the heavens. And more importantly, they would not be destroyed upon entering the divine land. The secondary creatures in the universe all ascended to the divine land after they became true gods, just like Rocher. Right now, Zen wasn't sure how long it would take him to condense the godly tile, but before that, he needed to become a genuine godly genius. And to achieve this, he had to attain a certain level of understanding of the godly way and break free from the shackles of the heavens. As the lotus flower started slowly rotating, Zen stared fixedly at it as if hypnotized. When the martial artists at the Soul Sea Realm, Spirit Supreme Realm, and Spirit Transformation Realm underwent tribulations, these lotus flowers had also appeared. But just with their appearance, there was no guarantee that they would bloom. On many occasions, the lotus flowers would only rotate a few times before quietly vanishing into thin air. Hence there was always an air of speculation, pertaining to the appearance of the flowers. That was why Zen was a bit nervous. He was afraid that his understanding of the emotion-closing godly way wasn't deep enough and that the lotus flower wouldn't bloom. After all, even he was unaware of the blooming strategy of the flower. He had already comprehended the great wishing spell. In theory, he had become a genuine godly genius. However, the great wishing spell wasn't acknowledged by the lotus flower. While Zen was paying attention to the lotus flower, Master Feng and Win also fixed their eyes on it. They were equally apprehensive regarding its bloom. They didn't know that Zen had processed a new understanding of the emotion-closing godly way. But the moment the lotus flower appeared, Master Feng could sense it immediately. As the controller of the heavens-suppressing object, Master Feng had a clear understanding of every lotus flower in full bloom in the entire evolutionary universe. Moreover, there were only a few hundred people in the entire universe who possessed the Mahayana lotus flowers, and only Zen's lotus flower had 35 leaves. Therefore, the moment Master Feng sensed it, he informed Win. This time, Zen should be successful, Win said coldly. Even after his lotus flower has fully bloomed, he still needs some time to condense his godly tile. I wonder how much more time will be needed, Master Feng said with a frown. It was true that the crisis of the evolutionary universe had come to an end, but Murphy would not let this matter rest. Time was never enough for Zen. It seemed like he was always running after it. No, Win shook his head dismissively. I won't give him more time to condense his godly tile. Hearing Win's words, Master Feng was slightly stunned. You mean, you will send Zen, who is only a world lord, into the divine land? That would be too dangerous for him. Win silently nodded his head firmly, as if he had already made his decision. But the competition in the divine land is very fierce. Although Zen's talent is incomparable, it is a huge risk to undertake, Master Feng protested. Win smiled slightly. It's not my idea, but my master's. I can't do much about it anyway. We all know that Zen is a man out of the ordinary. For all you know, he may not be able to condense the godly tile. Saying this, his eyes flickered. But the truth is, he doesn't even need the godly tile. The godly tile corresponded to the perfection of the life vitality cultivation system. Through the godly way tablets in the divine land, one would comprehend the supreme law of the divine land, the godly way. Then, the godly tile would cover the inner world, absorbing the force of the inner world to unleash the strongest power. All of these factors cleverly combined to complement each other. And they had been working splendidly until now. However, what Zen was cultivating right now was not the life vitality system, but the more powerful chaotic energy. In Win's eyes, Zen was just a secondary creature. However, no one could identify Zen's level. According to Win's understanding, even if Zen did not comprehend the godly way, it was unlikely that he would be disintegrated within the divine land. Zen was too special and powerful to be destroyed just like that. Hearing these words, Master Feng was extremely surprised. Through his experience, he knew and understood a lot of people. Although he felt that Zen was definitely different, he didn't expect that Win would give such a bizarre evaluation. Look, there's movement. Master Feng's eyes flashed. The lotus flower floating above Zen's head suddenly began to spin at a furious speed. Zen's gaze was fixed on that lotus flower. His gaze was becoming intensely bright, as if there were two flames burning fiercely at the same time. Swish. What's going on? At that moment, the evolution lotus flower that was originally controlled by Master Feng had escaped from his control. It suddenly condensed and flew towards Zen. Master Feng wanted to chant an incantation to bring the evolution lotus flower back, but he was stopped by Win. Don't interfere. This is my master's arrangement. Let us not disrupt it. Huff. It was astonishing to witness the speed of that evolution lotus flower. It only took a matter of seconds for it to fly millions of miles away. Soon, it arrived above Zen's head. A second lotus flower. How is that even possible? Zen was dumbfounded when he saw the evolution lotus flower fly over. This flower is the one controlled by Master Feng. How did it escape then? The evolution lotus flower that Master Feng controlled was slightly different from the lotus flowers that floated above the heads of ordinary warriors. For example, the lotus flower above Zen's head was pinkish white, while the evolution lotus flower of Master Feng was deep red. Apart from that, there were many other details that separated it from the rest. For example, the evolution lotus flower of Master Feng had always been a bud and never produced petals. The evolution lotus flower suddenly leapt above Zen's head and overlapped with the lotus flower that Zen had previously possessed, eventually replacing it and forming into one lotus flower. Chapter 1725, Legacy. The heavens suppressing object had already escaped Master Feng's control. It had now merged with Zen's lotus flower that had already bloomed. This meant that Zen had to reopen this evolution lotus flower again. This evolution lotus flower had never been opened ever since Master Feng had carried the heavenly destiny and obtained the heavens suppressing object. The heavens suppressing objects were originally precious weapons to the holy beings. Only holy beings had the right to use them. Letting the strongest supreme lord in the universe obtain the heavens suppressing object as a treasure was a common convention among the holy beings, but that did not mean that they could use it as they wished. Irrespective of whether it was Master Feng or the Grand Supreme Lord of the sacred race, they could only display a fraction of the heavens suppressing object's true strength. Master Feng watched the evolution lotus flower fly away, and with a casual wave of his hand, opened a space crack. In the blink of an eye, he and Win had walked into it and appeared beside Zen. This evolution lotus flower, it is blooming. Master Feng's face was filled with astonishment. Win, on the other hand, was calm. The evolution godly way is ranked at the 13th place, a high place among the 3,000 godly ways in the divine land. But very few people cultivate this godly way. There are countless true gods in the vast divine land. But there have only been fewer than 100 people who have cultivated the evolution godly way since the ancient times until now. Do you know why? Master Feng didn't have a great understanding of the divine land. The information he had obtained so far came from both Win and his own blood. Now that he had heard the story of the evolution lotus flower, he asked, why? The chaos is an entirety. You have heard of the evolutionary 50, right? It originated in ancient times, Win said. Master Feng knew what the evolutionary 50 meant and carried a heavenly destiny, but he did not know the logic behind it. His head spun as he listened to Win's explanation. I wonder what sort of a relationship your words have with the number of people cultivating the evolution godly way. Win laughed and replied, this is because this godly way is an attempt to generalize the entire chaos, which is the entire space outside of the divine land. The entire chaos. Master Feng's eyes lit up as his thoughts drifted. As far as mortals were concerned, the great world was already vast enough and without end. One wouldn't even be able to see the edges of the world for the rest of their life. When Master Feng had cultivated to the Soul Sea realm, he had felt that the supreme worlds were very large, each equal to 1,000 great worlds. It would take several hundred years for some martial artists to travel across a supreme world. Once he had reached the level of a world lord, he began to feel that a supreme world was too small and that it would only take a few days to cross it. What was really large was the universe. A universe might contain 100,000 supreme worlds, 1 million great worlds, and an endless starry sky. Now that he had become a supreme lord, the universe was nothing more than this, in his opinion. The greatest and most massive place should technically be the divine land. But now, Master Feng knew that there was an endless chaos outside of the divine land. The boundaries of this chaos were nearly impossible to explore. It was not only the infinite of the space, but also the infinite of the mind. If chaos can be generalized, it means that it has a boundary, Master Feng muttered after thinking for a while. Then what is outside the boundary? Win smiled and said, good question. This is a paradoxical question that even the holy beings cannot answer. Or rather, the holy being's understanding of chaos is still in a period of obscurity. If you ask me, a majority of holy beings who say that they roam the chaos, other than the few who will never return, are just circling around the divine land. Master Feng didn't know what to say at Win's evaluation. Win continued, from ancient times until now, the tablet of the evolution godly way is probably one that has been observed by the least number of martial artists. This is besides those few prohibited tablets. Every single tablet of the 3,000 godly ways recorded the name of the first person who had comprehended the godly way in remote ages. Most of them were martial artists belonging to the sacred race, because the sacred race had been the first race to flourish in the divine land. It had disappeared, true, but the names of those that had comprehended the godly ways in remote ages still existed. Only Mike's name remained on the tablet of the evolution godly way. This was because Mike had been the first person to comprehend the evolution godly way in the ancient times. Not only had he comprehended it, he had also used the godly way to become a holy being and had created an unimaginable miracle in the divine land. Because of how Mike's legend had spread, the evolution godly way, which no one had cared about before, became very popular. Which true god would not be tempted if one could cultivate the godly way to become a holy being? However, it was not easy to cultivate the evolution godly way. It had been popular for a while before news about it had petered out. Most true gods had given up. Only a very few people had comprehended the mysteries of the tablet, but in the end, they had been unable to achieve the same level as Mike had. Moreover, there wasn't another person who had become a holy being just by relying on this godly way. My master spent his entire life exploring the evolution godly way. It is precisely because of this that he, Win, couldn't continue, having been overcome with emotion. At the time, it had been such a great honor for him to have been accepted as Mike's disciple. Even Harold, who had been famous for a long time, had willingly become Mike's disciple. Now that it had ended like this, Win naturally felt sad. But he knew very well that his master had not given up, and that he had seen hope in Zen. He knew that his master wanted to truly pass on his legacy. Swoosh! The evolution lotus flower had not stopped blooming. The lotus flower petals did not bloom bit by bit. Instead, they spread out simultaneously in all directions, like the tentacles of an octopus. From the center of the lotus flower emerged a fresh, tender stamen, specks of light coiling around it. Zen raised his head and observed the scene before him. Master Feng had only understood a little of what Win had explained, but Zen hadn't even heard the explanation. Which was why he was still confused by what he saw. But Zen instinctively understood that whatever was happening before him must be related to his father's arrangements. And he would gladly accept it, no matter what happened. The faint light surrounding the stamen was like a firefly the size of a grain of rice. It circled around the lotus petals and sprinkled down towards Zen, enveloping him in a drizzle. Zen felt a gentle force on his face, blowing against his cheek. This feeling of laziness tired him out a little. His eyelids felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds and they then closed. It was not long before he entered dreamland. Of the evolutionary 50, only 49 are useful. Of the evolutionary 50, separate one into two. One is variable, and the other one is definite. A grave voice echoed, "I've heard those words before." Zen still had clear thoughts as if he was conscious, even though he was still dreaming. Irene had said this back in the illusion battlefield, but no one, including Zen, had been able to figure out the meaning of this phrase. The evolution godly way is the origin of counting. The grave voice continued to speak. Zen did not understand these words and could only engrave them into his heart, one word at a time. It was a while before the voice finally stopped. Zen's heart was suddenly filled with clarity and he discovered that he now seemed to have a profound understanding of the evolution godly way. This wasn't an epiphany on Zen's part, but a natural epiphany that followed the grave voice. Only now did Zen understand his father's painstaking arrangements. This was the legacy his father had left him. Chapter 1726, Stealing into the Divine Land. The heavens-suppressing object that was in full bloom was still slowly hovering above Zen's head. Bits of light continued to pour down, and eventually turned into a pale golden book that was reflected in Zen's mind. On top of the book were 3 large black words, Evolutionary Divine Arts. The voice that had been transmitting into Zen's mind was a part of the Evolutionary Divine Arts, and was also Mike's lifelong comprehension. The Evolutionary Divine Arts had the miraculous effect of strengthening the soul and spirit. One's soul power became several times stronger than that of an ordinary martial artist once they reached the highest level of cultivation. This meant that the power of Mike's soul was unrivaled among the holy beings. But Zen didn't know that the moment he began to comprehend the evolutionary divine arts, the aura emanating from his soul had begun to grow stronger by the minute. The gold fighting soul belonged to the strongest realm that a soul could reach in the universe. Becoming a gold fighting soul allowed one's soul to freely leave the body to defend it against the enemy. One could even attach their soul to their swords and sabers to increase the power of their weapons. The souls of Master Feng, Supreme Lord of Original Sin, and the others were all gold fighting souls. However, the true God soul was stronger than the gold fighting soul. The true God soul was just a generic term for the soul of the true God, but in reality, there was a difference in the strengths of the souls of different true gods. In the Divine Land, souls were classified according to their power. For example, the souls of Win and Murphy's disciple, Marco, were considered to be stronger than those of other true gods. The souls of Mateo and Pranav were slightly weaker. Zen's aura is increasing by a huge margin. Win had already detected the change in Zen's soul. Since a few golden sword shadows were still on Zen's soul, a sharp aura was now mixed within his soul. When he would release his soul aura, it would be like an arrow made to oppress and threaten. Win was still comfortable as he faced the waves of sharp aura that Zen was emitting. But Master Feng was beginning to feel uneasy. The streaks of formless, formidable aura shot out in all directions, some even piercing Master Feng's mind. The aura penetrated his soul, causing him great pain. This soul's aura is so formidable. Master Feng was so astonished, he retreated 3,000 feet in one startled jump. Master Feng was forced to retreat in surprise because of the aura. If Zen were to use his full strength and release his soul aura to attack someone, wouldn't he be able to instantly kill their soul? But Master Feng was retreating at a slower pace than the speed at which Zen's soul was strengthening. Once Master Feng had retreated to a distance of 3,000 feet, the imposing aura of the soul became even stronger. A few invisible arrows of imposing aura began to pierce his soul once again. He groaned for a long while before waving a hand and entering the space crack. His body appeared a dozen miles away, from where he looked upon Zen, his face pale. Zen's soul is still a gold-fighting soul, but his soul's strength is already on par with that of a true God soul, Win said calmly. Master's method of soul cultivation is unrivaled. In the distance, Master Feng's eyes were filled with reverence. This was the ability of the owner of the evolutionary universe. A person would have the upper hand in battle if their soul was strong. Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment had died because of Marco's soul-searching flag. He had not been able to fight back even with the power of the blessed Buddha land. Zen could easily kill a Supreme Lord with just his soul if he fought them at his current level. Zen didn't know that the aura he had unintentionally emitted had forced Master Feng to retreat. He was still lost in his own thoughts. The faint light scattered down chaotically. Besides the evolutionary divine arts, a green jade ruler was condensing in his mind as the light gathered together. When the jade ruler was completely formed, Zen's eyes flashed as he saw two large words appear on the ruler. Infinity ruler. Why would such a ruler appear? Father said that the evolution godly way is the source of counting. What does it have to do with this ruler? Questions buzzed around in Zen's mind. But nobody was able to answer Zen's questions. The authoritative voice that had recited the evolutionary divine arts could no longer be heard. Zen could only rely on himself to figure out the mystery behind it, if there was any. After a while, the faint light from the stamen of the evolution lotus flower finally stopped. The evolution lotus flower had spiraled for a while before its petals returned from a state of bloom to their original state. Huff, huff, the evolution lotus flower circled in the air before flying the short distance to Master Feng. At this moment, Zen opened his eyes and turned to look back, only to realize that Win and Master Feng had rushed over to him. He smiled. Master Win, Master Feng. Win smiled back as he said, "Congratulations. You must have comprehended something new about the godly way." Zen nodded, a look of regret on his face. "It's a pity that I haven't condensed my godly tile." As he spoke, his gaze penetrated the darkness and stared at the blue light spot above the dome of the universe. Many mortals saw this light spot as a special star that had appeared quite suddenly. Some people called this spot the spider star, while others called it the ominous star. Either way, it was a bad omen. Only a few martial artists knew that the light spot was not a star, but a scar left behind on the sighing wall by Murphy after he had shattered the sighing wall. The sighing wall of the universe had the ability to heal itself completely. But it would probably take tens of millions of years for this scar to heal. And this meant that the mortals could not see the light spot disappear. As he looked at the light spot, Zen's heart was filled with a violent killing intent. He couldn't wait to step into the divine land and personally kill Murphy. But he didn't know how and when to condense a godly tile. Win smiled. "There's no need to wait so long." "What?" Zen looked suspiciously at Win. "You have already removed the limits of the heavens. I can now send you to the divine land," Win said. "You'll send me there? Won't I ascend to the divine land on my own after I condense my godly tile?" Zen asked curiously. When Zen had broken through and reached the life and death realm in the lower world, he had been rejected by the world itself and forced into the ascending passageway by the world's power. And if one could condense a godly tile in the upper world, they would also be rejected by the universe and ascend to the divine land. This had been the case for many years. Win laughed. That's not really it. True gods who form their godly tiles in the universe are usually led to the divine land by a member of the Zhang clan. But the guide in the evolutionary universe has already been forced to return to the Zhang clan. The young lady from the Zhang clan? Zen asked. Win nodded. The Zhang clan wrote down this rule through that stone slab 1,000 divine eras ago. That's why the Zhang clan is responsible for guiding the warriors in the universe to the divine land and controlling the heavens. None of the holy beings could violate this rule. But this time, we are lucky enough that the young lady was forced to stay back in the Zhang clan. Even your sister has also contributed to this matter. Zen's eyebrows rose at Win's mention of Yan and a sword-like light flashed through his eyes. Win laughed and said, "Don't get too excited. I'm only guessing at the moment. If I'm not mistaken, Harold might have done something, otherwise the Zhang clan wouldn't have allowed the controller of the heavens of the evolutionary universe to become vacant for so long." Zen calmed himself down. He was too sensitive and did not know where to look for Yan even if he did go to the divine land. But right now, he had another question to pose to Win. Why did the Zhang clan send their own members to control the heavens? Sending members of the clan to different universes to help other holy beings control the heavens was a thankless task. You don't even know that the Zhang clan's floating island in the Time Sea is considered one of the top 10 big islands in the first tier. The reason they are able to raise their clan to such a high level is because they rely on the method of controlling the heavens. And this is related to the Zhang clan's cultivation method. You will gradually understand all of this once you enter the divine land. Now, I can help you sneak into the divine land. Chapter 1727, A Maze. The divine land, over time, had developed countless divine eras. The passage of time here was unimaginably long. A set of strict rules had been put into place in the divine land. A few of these rules were so important that even a holy being wouldn't dare be caught defying one of them. Once Murphy had put his anger into action, he received the punishment he deserved, to say the least. There was no room for disobedience. Win didn't speak up much about the way Zen was going to be sent into the divine land. In fact, it had taken quite some time for Mike's disciples to figure out a plan for forcing Irene into returning to the divine land. Roche, in fact, had also entered the divine land by sneaking in. No matter if it was Roche or Zen, if they entered the divine land using any normal method, the Mu clan would immediately be informed about their arrival. One of the reasons why their blood had been exchanged was just for that, to avoid being tracked. If Murphy had been able to track them, then the 10 godly geniuses would all be doomed. I have no choice but to sneak into the divine land. Zen frowned as he murmured to himself. This has been decided a long time ago. Even if I die, there will still be others to help you sneak over there, Win said. Win had managed to survive the Great War. If he died now though, the weighted responsibility of helping Zen and the others sneak into the divine land would be handed over to Master Feng and the other celestial position members. I understand, Zen nodded. In the end, it didn't matter to him what method he used in order to enter the divine land. When you're ready, you can come and find me. That said, it's best if you enter the divine land as soon as possible. Although they can try their best to hinder the Zhang clan, they might send someone else over at any moment. Win added, matter-of-factly. You know, Irene is a friendly young lady. Try not to worry too much, she isn't as harsh as she seems, Zen explained as he recalled his conversation with her. Win smiled. Well, she isn't as friendly as you think, either. Anyone who's sent by the Zhang clan to control the heavens is far more powerful than you can ever imagine. It's not that simple. What's more, she isn't a young lady. Judging by the average lifespan of a true god, she would still be relatively young. However, if one was to calculate according to the time flow rate in the evolutionary universe, she would be over 20 billion years old. Both Zen and Master Feng were rendered speechless in an instant. That meant that even Master Feng was much younger than Irene, not to mention that Zen himself was nothing more than a few decades old. 20 billion years of age. Unbelievable, that was equivalent to several grand eras. This woman had lived for so long and yet she was still capable of communicating with Zen like any other ordinary young lady. It was indeed hard to imagine how she had lived through the past countless years. Now that Zen had the right conditions for going to the divine land, his only remaining task was to arrange his family members well. Over the years, Zen had always been worried about the problem of time. However, in the fairy palace, Zen had finally discovered a way to solve such an issue. Saul told Zen that after he obtained the last token, the Earth token, he would be able to enter the training tower. The time law in the training tower was steady, and Bromley's ingenious design had allowed the time on different floors to be condensed to different levels. The training tower was divided into 4 floors. The first floor had a time flow rate of 1:1, the second floor had a time flow rate of 100:1, the third floor had a time flow rate of 1000:1, and the fourth floor was 10,000:1. Generally speaking, anywhere affected by the time law wasn't suitable for cultivation, because other laws would also be twisted by the distortion of the time law. Within the divine refinement forbidden land, Holy Drew had helped Zen refine his body. The time law there had been distorted beyond recognition, it was therefore almost impossible to cultivate in such a state. Despite that though, the training tower was a rare exception. Bromley had created this unique tower with his own power and it was thus extremely stable. Once the training tower was opened, Zen would without a doubt have enough time to cultivate. According to Saul, the fairy palace was located in the Swirl Forest, which was known as a forbidden area in the divine land. The time flow rate in the Swirl Forest was the same as that of the entire divine land. However, once the enchanted barrier was activated, the time flow rate within the fairy palace matched that of the evolutionary universe. This was because the enchanted barrier that enveloped the fairy palace isolated it from the rest of the divine land, affecting the flow of time. Once Zen had obtained the Earth token and collected all 8 tokens, he would have the capacity of removing the enchanted barrier that shrouded the fairy palace. Following this, the time flow rate in the fairy palace would no longer match that of the universe but instead, would be the same as that of the divine land. As a result, arranging his family members there, in the fairy palace, became Zen's only clear option. Throughout that period of time, every time Zen would set foot in the fairy palace, Master Evil and Wayne would circle him like flies. The blue-robed woman had returned to the fairy palace. She had penetrated through the enchanted barrier with ease and left the fairy palace on her own. Master Evil and Wayne also had the desire to leave the fairy palace and yet, they dared not approach the woman. When the blue-robed woman returned to the fairy palace, both men had already disappeared, hiding in the dungeon. After she left, the enchanted barrier automatically closed behind her, and neither of them had the ability to break through it. All they could do now was to wait patiently for Zen, in hopes that he would let them out. The problem was that Zen still couldn't control the opening and closing of the enchanted barrier on his own. He still hadn't obtained the Earth token and was unable to completely control the fairy palace just yet. Irritated and annoyed by these two people who bothered him all the time, Zen suggested that they enter the evolutionary universe and leave through there. However, they immediately refused his suggestion. They knew that the universe was closely monitored by holy beings. How would they even have the guts to appear in the evolutionary universe? In other words, that was the equivalence of courting death. With such negation toward his suggestion, Zen could only ask them to sit patiently and wait. Zen had finally made up his mind. He decided to challenge the true path once again. Zen had made full preparations for the final phase of the true path. With his current abilities, he believed that it wouldn't be too difficult for him to get through the true path. Despite his abilities though, the final phase of the true path had been ingeniously designed by Bromley. It would certainly be a difficult task for Zen, whether he liked it or not. In fact, this phase of the true path was no longer a path, but a huge maze. The sacred warriors in this maze weren't very strong, though. At least Zen would easily defeat them with his current strength. The maze itself was very complex. Straight from the entrance, it contained the powers of the 5 elements. Zen wandered around within it for dozens of hours before finding himself exactly where he had started. He was confused and dizzy. In the end, he felt helpless enough to give up and leave the true path. This was the first and only time that he ever had given up halfway on the true path. I wonder why Master set up such a confusing and irritating maze at the end of the true path. Zen furrowed his brow and muttered aloud. Because this maze is very important. As Zen obtained more and more tokens, Saul seemed to hide less and less information from him. Master wants you to remember this maze. What's the meaning of it, though? Zen asked. It doesn't matter what the meaning is. You just need to succeed in finishing this maze. I just can't wait any longer. I've already been delayed for a few more years. Master Evil and Wayne both dreamed of the day they'd finally leave the fairy palace. Although Zen had finally released them from the dungeon, they never thought that they would be trapped inside the fairy palace's enchanted barrier. If it wasn't for the fact that they were afraid of triggering a few of the restrictive spells within the fairy palace, they would have already tried destroying it long ago. Right now, they had to wait for Zen to pass the true path. This maze is related to the disappearance of the sacred race, and it was not invented by Master. It actually exists in the world, Saul explained. However, the maze built by the sacred race was countless times larger and more complicated than the one in front of you. Back then, even Master was unable to pass through that maze, until he was trapped inside it for 12 divine eras. After finally escaping from the maze, he replicated a small part of it according to his memories. Even Master can't successfully pass through the sacred race's maze. Zen asked as obvious astonishment quickly filled his eyes. Yes, that is true, but this maze really does have an exit. Master wants you to firmly carve this maze into your mind. Just as it was carved into his, Saul replied. Since Saul had described it as of utmost importance, Zen had no other choice but to challenge the maze again and again. In fact, with Zen's current memory, no matter how complicated the route was, he would still remember it. This maze seemed to be an illusionary one though, and therefore Zen wouldn't have the chance of repeating the same route twice. Zen's only option left was extremely stupid, that of only turning right in the maze. Theoretically, even in the most complex maze, he would eventually find the exit if he always chose one same direction. Ultimately, Zen spent nearly 4 months in the maze before managing his way out, after a countless number of attempts and failures. Just like Saul had said, this maze had been deeply engraved in Zen's mind from beginning to end. That said though, he couldn't think of any use for remembering the maze's route. Once Zen had the Earth token in hand, he didn't even have the time to open the training tower before Master Evil and Wayne were already anxiously asking him to open the enchanted barrier for them. Chapter 1728, Disintegration. Before opening the enchanted barrier, Zen went to the weapon refining workshop and took Livingston from the fairy palace, permitting him to stay temporarily in the breaking cloud world. Livingston was not pleased to be disturbed by Zen. He had been busy forging weapons in the weapon refining workshop day and night, but now his work had been interrupted by Zen. He naturally found the situation unsatisfactory. However, Zen did in that way as a precaution. The secondary creature would be disintegrated upon entering the Divine Land, and if Livingston entered the Divine Land as a puppet, that would probably not be much better. It could be said that all the materials from the universe would disintegrate after they were brought into the Divine Land. If the enchanted barrier was removed, then the power within the Divine Land could potentially disintegrate his metal body and soul. After chasing Livingston away, Zen returned once more to the fairy palace. Following to Saul's instructions, he neatly placed the 8 tokens together. As Zen activated these tokens one after the other, the 8 tokens seemed to come to life. At first they circled in the air for a while before finally settling themselves in their own order. The sequence of the 8 tokens was heaven, earth, thunder, wind, water, fire, mountain, and valley. The tokens connected together in the air and formed themselves into a ring. A black and white light began to shine out from the ring. These were the dark and light energies that Zen had encountered on the true path. The dark and light energies circled and fused together, eventually turning into the perfect 8 diagrams. The 8 diagrams floated slowly in front of Zen. Put in your hand, Saul instructed. Not far away, when Master Evil and Wayne saw the scene which unfolded, their eyes betrayed their greed and desire. Being able to control the 8 diagrams meant that one could exercise complete control over the whole fairy palace. The fairy palace had been left behind by Bromley. They might not know about all the secrets and resources within the walls, but the dungeon that had trapped them for countless years had left an indelible impression upon them. Therefore they assumed that the rest of the fairy palace must be equally magical. However, their greedy expressions only lasted for an instant before fading away. After all, there was a chance that they might not be able to get the approval of the 8 diagrams. On top of that, they had sworn an inner demon oath in front of Zen before, and if they broke it, it would cast a shadow over their future lives. Moreover, Bromley was not Mike, and was not yet dead. If he came back to attack at any point, then even if they occupied the fairy palace, they would not be able to resist him in a fight. At that point they would simply be courting death. Assuming that they would soon be able to ascend, they restrained the greed that was growing in their hearts. As Zen extended his hand into the 8 diagrams started to revolve slowly around his arm. The 8 tokens kept spiraling upwards all the way along his arm, until they finally reached Zen's head. From a distance, Zen appeared to be wearing a strange hat. Not long afterwards, the 8 diagrams and tokens began to dissipate, fusing into Zen's mind and fusing with his soul. Zen was experiencing mixed emotions and he began to sigh. Many things had stayed in his mind before. The 9 genuine dragons and lavender had already left his brain, but the evolutionary divine arts and the infinity ruler with unknown uses appeared clearly in his mind. Now, the 8 diagrams had also drilled deep into his mind. After the 8 diagrams melded into his soul, Zen suddenly felt as if his soul was connected to the fairy palace. Everything in the fairy palace seemed to have life just like his arms and legs. With just a thought, he could now open any door in the fairy palace. These arrays: Soaring Dragon Array, Triple Elements Array, Divine Scorpion Array. Now, Zen finally sensed the existence of several powerful restrictions and arrays within the fairy palace. These restrictions and arrays were all carefully concealed. Zen had not noticed them in the past as his movement range had been limited. Zen was able to freely control the arrays and restrictions, which raised new questions in his mind. Only a small portion of the arrays and restrictions in the fairy palace were intended to defend against attacks from outside enemies, and the majority of them were aimed towards the inside of the fairy palace, to be more precise, into the depths of the ground under the fairy palace. When he came to this realization, a perplexed expression settled across Zen's face once more. If that was the case, were there some extraordinary surprises hidden far below the fairy palace? Zen, can't you work faster? Master Evil complained. If there's a problem, we can discuss it later. Can't you let us out of here first? Wayne begged. When he heard their words, Zen rolled his eyes. He would have liked to ask Saul about it, but he thought that the things hidden far below the fairy palace were probably too serious for him to mention in front of Master Evil and Wayne. He chose to restrain his curiosity and simply replied, "All right, I'll let you out now." By opening the enchanted barrier of the fairy palace, Zen knew that he had truly stepped into the divine land. However, Master Evil was right. Just as he had said, the Swirl Forest was indeed an exceptionally powerful forbidden area. Even with all of their strength, they still needed to be careful. It was quite possible that a lack of care and attention could result in their death. Zen obviously could not pass through the Swirl Forest to get to the divine land. When he reached the point of actually opening the enchanted barrier, Zen couldn't deny that he was still a little nervous. When he first left the lower world and ascended to the upper world, the disorderly vitality which existed between heaven and earth had made him feel quite uncomfortable. This divine land was a true world to the secondary creatures. He had no idea what sorts of pressure it would bring to bear on him. Act quickly, Wayne urged him again, noticing that Zen was still not moving. Zen just nodded and shut his eyes. As for the pink enchanted barrier which was set to guard the fairy palace, Bromley named it the Bubble Enchanted Barrier. The space within the enchanted barrier could transform into the space of the divine land, or into the space of the universe, or even into a passageway between two spaces. To possess the ability to establish such an enchanted barrier meant that Bromley was indeed a rare talent. Although the Bubble Enchanted Barrier did not possess a large range, it was equivalent to a miniature universe. Buzz, buzz. The pink Bubble Enchanted Barrier, which covered the fairy palace, quivered like a huge soap bubble before suddenly bursting. The moment the crack appeared, Zen's eyes flashed. This was the first time he had felt the aura of the divine land, yet he couldn't detect anything special or any unusual feeling. It was as if the divine land was ordinary. Then, in the blink of an eye, he felt something strange from his fingers. Cracks were now appearing on his space ring. The ring suddenly shattered and it jumped free of Zen's hand. At the same time, a vast expanse of white mist had begun to emerge from the ring. This space ring was actually starting to disintegrate on its own. This is bad. When I brought this space ring I forgot that it also comes from the universe. Unfortunately, it was now too late to correct his mistake. The space ring rapidly turned into a mass of white mist that scattered in all directions. And as the space ring disintegrated, an even more bizarre scene started to unfold. Normally, if a space ring was damaged, the space within would collapse and it became impossible to find the things hidden within it. When that happened, the things that were hidden within the Sumeru space would be lost forever. However, at this moment, when the space ring had broken apart, the space in the space ring that was brought over from the universe didn't collapse, but instead disintegrated along with the space ring. Thus the things that were inside the space ring shot out in an instant. Fairy weapons, sacred weapons, sabers, swords, bows, and other weapons of the various ranks were all squeezed from the disintegrated space and sprinkled onto the ground before Zen. Fortunately, Zen had acted cautiously earlier and had placed some important items within the Breaking Cloud world, rather than brought them with him into the fairy palace. Thus the items stored in this space ring were not especially valuable. Cracks also began to appear on the surface of the sabers and swords. White mist continued to billow out before disappearing in front of Zen. The only items that did not vanish were the Great Weighty Sword and the Great Weighty Sword scabbard that Zen had in his possession. They were spared because they were made by Livingston from materials taken from the fairy palace, and these materials originated in the divine land. Noting that the enchanted barrier had now disappeared, Master Evil and Wayne could not disguise their joy. They clapped their hands together to thank Zen, and then while laughing got ready to leave. Just one moment, please, Zen suddenly said. Chapter 1729, The Huge White Ape. With the enchanted barrier was removed, nothing could stop Master Evil and Big Mouth anymore. Danger still lurked in the Swirl Forest. However, as long as they did not seek their own deaths, it would not be too dangerous for them. What else do you want? Master Evil asked with a smile. Despite his current situation, arrogance was still in his tone. You should remember that you promised to help me accomplish one task, said Zen with suspicious eyes. Zen forced them to make the inner demon oath at that time because he wanted them to fight against the true gods of the Murphy universe. They were stronger than Blade but weaker than the blue-clothed woman. In the end, they did not fight. However, the oath still applied. Of course I remember. Master Evil let out a loud laugh. If we meet in the Divine Land one day and you have any needs, I won't hesitate to help you. Tell me any desires you might have at that time. Yeah, don't worry about that, we won't forget. Wayne hurriedly nodded his head as well. It seemed that they would both honor their oaths. However, it wasn't their exact thought. At that moment, they could already leave the fairy palace. The Divine Land was so vast that it was very likely that they would never have the chance to see Zen again for the rest of their lives. They believed that they wouldn't have to keep their promises as long as Zen couldn't find them. Zen shrugged his shoulders and laughed. With a callous look he said, since you are so reasonable, I can be relieved. Master Evil and Wayne didn't hesitate any longer. They strode forth and headed straight for the entrance of the fairy palace. At last, they were finally able to leave the place where they were imprisoned for countless years. As he saw them leave, Zen's eyes widened. Bewilderment enveloped Zen as he stared at their backs. Why don't they fly? Saul seemed to have already expected such a situation. He smiled slightly and answered diligently, they can't fly here. If you don't believe me, why don't you try it? Flight was a fairly easy thing to do in the universe. Most creatures with sufficient cultivation could hover through the air. After the warriors in the lower world cultivated to the illuminating soul realm, they would activate their life vitality to fuse with the wind and soar into the sky. Once they cultivated to higher levels, they would become even more powerful. They could travel through space, display the grand teleportation technique and take one step across millions of miles. Their mobility increased as their cultivation improved. However, they couldn't do such things easily in the Divine Land. After he heard Saul's words, Zen began to condense his chaotic energy. Intense focus accompanied his face as he willed himself to fly into the sky. However, the moment he condensed the wind law, the law power instantly collapsed. It was as if an invisible force had confined him to the spot. He had originally thought that he would float with the wind. Yet, he remained unmoved on the ground. Why? A hint of surprise flashed across his eyes. He extended his hand and waved it, intending to travel through space. However, just like last time, both the wind law and the space law were extinguished in a flash. It was as if there was some mysterious power that had extinguished the law power that Zen cultivated. The expression on Zen's face was full of confusion. It's useless, Saul said faintly with a regretful look. The space in the Divine Land is very different from the space you know. In fact, the universes inhabited by secondary creatures, like yours, are just unreal spaces created by the holy beings. It's just like when people sleep, they tend to be omnipotent. As such, the universes are just products of the wills of holy beings. Only the Divine Land is the real world. When the holy beings built the universes, their imaginations fueled the creation. They did not impose any restrictions on any of the laws and made everyone able to control the laws. The universes that secondary creatures lived on were equivalent to the oceans, where all sorts of life forms could freely swim around. Each of them had the liberty to do whatever they wanted as long as they had power. Even a newly born fish could float in the water while asleep. However, at his current location, Zen was like a living being on land for the first time. When he tried to jump up, he found that he couldn't float as he did in the sea. Everything suddenly felt very restrictive. Zen still had an unconvinced expression on his face. Additionally, he was still puzzled and his eyes reflected his perplexity. But I've inherited the laws from the holy beings. Why don't they work here? Both of the Supreme Lords and the World Lords in the evolutionary universe had a deep comprehension of the laws. They were powerful enough to will the laws with a simple thought. Their comprehension came directly from the master of the evolutionary universe, Mike's comprehension of the laws. Since Mike could use the law power in the Divine Land, why couldn't the secondary creatures that obtained his inheritance use it? They don't all lose their effectiveness, Saul said flatly. His face was calm with a hint of pity. If you don't believe me, you can try condensing a flame. As he heard Saul's remark, Zen flicked his finger. Suddenly, a fireball shot out from his fingertip. It continuously rolled forward until it exploded about dozens of feet away. Boom! After the flame exploded, the intense fire turned Zen's face bright red. He stared dumbfoundedly at the fire and muttered, "Does that mean that only the wind law and the space law are suppressed?" Normally, when martial artists flew through the air, they would use the wind law. Similarly, when they traveled through space, they would use the space law. Although these two kinds of law power weren't particularly mighty when used against an enemy, they were still indispensable to martial artists. Such mobility was necessary inside and outside of combat. And the time law. These three laws have been suppressed in the divine land. The use of them is limited by the rules stated on that stone slab, Saul reminded with a callous look. Does this mean even the holy beings can't fly? Zen raised another question. Curiosity began to invade his mind. Saul shrugged his shoulders. Not really. In reality, the top-ranked true gods can resist the suppressive power and fly. Master Evil and Wayne are both only at the peak of mid-rank true gods level, so they are unable to resist the suppressive power. Therefore, they can only run on the ground. However, as warriors grow stronger, their resistance to the limits of the stone slab also improves. I see. Zen nodded as he digested his newfound knowledge. Just as he finished his words, a sharp, high-pitched sound could be heard from outside the fairy palace. Thump, thump, thump. As the high-pitched sound reverberated, the ground under Zen's feet also began to tremble. Everything in the swirl forest was unfathomable. Moreover, the divine land was extremely stable. The thing that could cause such a commotion must be an extremely powerful existence. It could shake the earth beneath. Such power would be extremely mighty. Soon, Zen's gaze pierced through the eaves of the fairy palace. Suddenly, a huge white ape entered his field of vision. The ape, which was about 2,000 feet tall, stood at the edge of the fairy palace's outer wall. As its slender and powerful arms dropped to the ground, it sized up Zen with its bright yellow eyes. It opened its bloody mouth slightly and howled ferociously. As he was stared at by the ape, Zen felt as if his entire body was suddenly pressured by the weight of trillions of tons of power. The intense pressure made it even more difficult for him to move. Be careful, all the beasts in the swirl forest are very powerful. Normal true gods are not even matches for them. Their raw power is extremely destructive. The ape is calling upon its own kind. It may attack at any time, Saul said to Zen with a voice full of caution. You can release Blackie now. The bubble-enchanted barrier of the fairy palace covered quite a large area. The huge white ape had already reached the borders of the fairy palace. Within seconds, the ape would already be inside the territory of the fairy palace. Zen was left with no time to activate the enchanted barrier to keep it out. The first time he stepped into the fairy palace in the eastern region, he encountered a huge white tiger at the edge of the barrier. Luckily, the bubble-enchanted barrier was able to divide the space of the divine land into two worlds, the inside and the outside of the fairy palace. Otherwise, with Zen's strength at that time, he would have been already killed by the tiger's glare. Such was the power of the beasts in the swirl forest. At his current predicament, Zen had already grown much stronger. However, he still felt an intense pressure when he faced the giant white ape. His expression remained calm, but a single thought had already flashed through his mind. Since he had been in complete control of the fairy palace, a single thought of his could affect the fairy palace. All of its property and amenities were easily at his disposal. Clang! In the backyard of the fairy palace, the fairy chain that was tied to Blackie was quietly broken. Suddenly Blackie was freed. The lion-sized soul-shaking mastiff charged out of its house. It then immediately turned into a black stream of light and rapidly shot onto the wall of the fairy palace. With great haste, it rushed over via the fairy palace's roof. Awoo! The huge white ape directed its ferocious eyes straight at Zen. However, as it sensed the arrival of the soul-shaking mastiff, the huge white ape suddenly waved its hands, which were thousands of feet long. As its enormous hands penetrated through the wall of the fairy palace, the huge white ape tried to grab Zen. Back off, Saul warned with a low voice. Although Zen felt a great pressure, he naturally knew that it was better to retreat first when he saw the giant hairy hands that approached him. With extensive battle experience, his instincts had grown quite sharp. Unable to fly in the air, he had no choice but to leap backward. His body rose up from the ground and drew an arc in the air as he jumped. Just as he was about to fall into the pond in the fairy palace, the huge white ape acted quickly. The moment Zen jumped up, it changed the direction of its two giant hands and grabbed him in midair. An enormous fist tightly gripped Zen's body. Then, it tried to drag him out of the fairy palace. The swirl forest was one of the forbidden lands for true gods. In addition to huge white apes, there were also some other unimaginable and dangerous monsters. If Zen was taken to the forest, he would not be able to protect himself with his current strength. However, before the huge white ape could retract its hand, a black shadow jumped up from the roof of the weapon refining workshop. The soul-shaking mastiff named Blackie let out a series of roars. Intense pressure accompanied each of his barks. Woof, 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 woof. The power contained in the roars could make many creatures feel fear, and the huge white ape was no exception. Its giant hand that held Zen trembled involuntarily. Terror seemed to devour the huge white ape's feral mind. Immediately, the soul-shaking mastiff had already bit onto the arm of the giant white ape. Chapter 1730, Blackbirds and Bugs. This soul-shaking mastiff was much smaller than the giant white ape in size, but it was nonetheless extremely powerful as it was a true spirit. As the soul-shaking mastiff chomped down on the giant white ape, a crisp sound that could send shivers down one's spine was heard. Within a few more seconds, the giant ape's thick arm was bitten straight off. Zen got rid of the ape's grip and he fell down from the sky. Awoo! The giant white ape howled out in pain, its eyes gleaming with anger. It waved its other arm out in front of him and quickly sent a palm strike flying toward the soul-shaking mastiff. The soul-shaking mastiff reacted very fast, though. After biting off the giant white ape's arm, it once again leapt and dodged the giant ape's slap. It then climbed up the giant white ape's remaining arm. As soon as the soul-shaking mastiff reached the ape's shoulder, it pounced again, this time its mouth open wide with the intent to bite the white ape's throat. However, just as the soul-shaking mastiff was no more than a few feet away from the white ape's throat, a white shadow suddenly flashed past them and a mountain-like fist smashed directly down onto the soul-shaking mastiff. Boom, woo, woo, accompanied by a loud bang, the soul-shaking mastiff let out a blood-curdling screech as it was smashed down into the fairy palace. Surprisingly and unexpectedly, another giant ape had appeared outside the fairy palace. The second giant ape was also white in color. In contrast though, this one had a clump of red fur on its head. It looked like a flame dancing above its head. Awoo! The giant red-furred ape let out a low growl. It was obvious that it was enraged, and with reason. Although the soul-shaking mastiff had been punched by the second white ape, the second it landed, it rolled over on the ground in an attempt to get up. It lowered its body and vigilantly looked at the two giant apes standing outside the fairy palace. It too, roared in low voice and revealed its two long fangs, but it didn't dare pounce on them. It was only seconds ago that Zen had struggled free from the white ape's arm. When he noticed that the soul-shaking mastiff was showing signs of fear, a strange expression appeared on Zen's face. From Zen's point of view, the soul-shaking mastiff, known as Blackie, was most likely extremely powerful. Although these two giant apes were powerful, there was no reason Blackie should be afraid of them. Blackie, on his behalf, didn't dare rush out of the fairy palace just yet. Less than a split second later though, Zen understood what the soul-shaking mastiff was afraid of. Outside the fairy palace, more and more giant apes emerged from behind the walls and around the corners, one by one. In a very short period of time, more than 10 apes had actually appeared. Each and every one of them very tall and strong. The first giant ape, the one who had attacked Zen, had a completely white body. The second giant ape had a wisp of bright red fur that looked like raging flames on the top of its head. It was 3 times bigger than the first giant and was also much stronger. The apes that emerged now were even larger than that, and they all had red hair on their heads, too. In fact, the all-white giant ape was just a baby compared to these other apes. The red-haired giant apes stood outside the fairy palace like a row of tall mountains, tightly surrounding the side of the fairy palace. "Ahoo!" they cried. Once all the apes had appeared, several huge black birds began appearing in the sky above. The black birds all had 4 pairs of wings, and the feathers on their bodies were protruding like long needles. It was difficult to condense the wind law enough to fly in the divine land, but these giant birds relied on their massive sets of wings to do so instead. "So many," Zen quietly uttered. There were a total of approximately 60 giant black birds circling around the fairy palace. Just from the aura these giant black birds emanated, it was safe to assume that they weren't any weaker than the giant apes. Buzz, buzz, buzz. And that wasn't the end of it. After the giant black birds appeared, numerous giant gray bugs started joining the masses. Although these giant gray bugs weren't as huge as the black birds and giant apes, each of them was as tall as a person. Moreover, they densely covered the ground, just like an enormous, scary gray cloud closing in from far away. In the middle of these giant gray bugs, a giant crimson bug was being carried by the other giant bugs. That giant crimson bug had a pair of compound eyes and seemed to be concentrating its thoughts on something as it stared at Zen from a distance. It was obvious that the giant apes, black birds and the bugs in the swirl forest all had a very form of high intelligence. After all, Zen had only just taken control of this fairy palace, and the aura exuded by these bizarre creatures of the divine land was almost comparable to that of a true god. Watching the scene play out before him, Zen couldn't help feeling a little panicked. These guys are still thinking about the things beneath the fairy palace, Saul thought to himself as he too watched the action take place. He then turned to Zen and said, "Master, just activate all the killing arrays within the fairy palace." Prior to this occurrence, Saul had wanted to guide Zen gently in order to familiarize him with the fairy palace's controls and had thus asked him to release Blackie. He had never expected that as soon as the bubble-enchanted barrier covering the fairy palace opened, all these strange creatures would surge out together, reacting very fast. It had been countless years since the bubble-enchanted barrier had been opened the last time. "You're right, I should activate the arrays." This was the first time that Zen had taken complete control of the fairy palace, and he was still a little unfamiliar with the latter. Only after hearing Saul's reminder did Zen think of using the arrays. In reality, the reason why these creatures didn't attack was because they were afraid of the various killing arrays within the fairy palace. The first white ape had attacked Zen in order to test whether the killing arrays within the fairy place were ineffective or not. It would soon have its answer. As the number of vicious beasts gathered here increased, they also became more and more rowdy, unable to restrain themselves and capable of charging into the fairy palace in the blink of an eye. "Awoo!" The white ape in the lead suddenly let out a loud, piercing howl. It opened its arms and moved over to the outer wall of the fairy palace with the intent to climb over it. The black mass of strange birds and huge bugs also began circulating around restlessly. "Be quick," Saul hissed hurriedly, with an anxious expression on his face. Zen's thoughts quickly flashed through his mind, and he opened up all of the killing arrays, not caring about the sequences they might have. Huff! From the depths of the fairy palace, a seven-colored longsword slowly rose from the shadows. Even before it was in full sight, it began shooting out streams of colorful sword shadows. Shoo, 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 shoo. These colorful sword shadows shot out so fast, and they gave way to the perception that they could destroy anything. As the sword shadows pierced into the white apes, a large bloody hole was left in their bodies. When the sword shadows shot into the bodies of the giant gray bugs, the giant bugs were turned into the powder that looked like blackened ash. Squeak, squeak, awoo, quack. All sorts of screams could be heard around the fairy palace as numerous ferocious beasts were killed by the colorful sword shadows. Clang, clang, clang. A few colorful sword shadows hit the giant crimson bug from a distance, but a crisp metallic sound resisted the blade. It was unbelievable. The giant crimson bug was actually capable of blocking the colorful sword shadow's attack. These vicious beasts had suffered heavy casualties in such a short period of time, but they still wouldn't retreat. Instead, they split into three groups and respectively charged towards Zen, Saul, and Blackie at full speed. However, when they passed through the fairy palace's square and rushed into the inner courtyard, an illusionary little person without any expression on the face and a large hammer appeared on the pavilion. The illusionary person held the large hammer and struck at the pavilion with mighty force. Clang! The hammer seemed to have hit a large gong as it produced an explosive sound. At the same time, an invisible force surged out from the ground beneath them and scattered out in all directions. This power had no effect on Zen, Saul, and Blackie. However, it seemed to have a miraculous effect on the monsters in the swirl forest. The enormous monsters were trapped in this great flow of power and were pushed out of the fairy palace with a gust of force. Squeak, 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 squeak. The giant crimson bug, on its behalf, was unwilling to be expelled so easily. It had keenly sensed Zen's existence and seemed to know that he was a key figure in the fairy palace. It was at that moment that it opened its 6 pairs of bright red wings and charged towards Zen, despite the onslaught of power. Despite its best efforts, the invisible force was very great and the bug's flying route in the air was crooked. Its speed was still shockingly fast and in the blink of an eye, it was only 2 or 3 short feet away from Zen. So close up, Zen could now clearly see its detailed sickle-like mouthpart and smell the stench emitted by it. When the giant crimson bug opened its mouth to swallow Zen's head, beams of 7-colored light flew over once again. A saving grace. It turned out that the 7-colored long sword continued releasing sword shadows in order to kill the remaining vicious beasts. However, most of the vicious beasts had been pushed straight out of the fairy palace by the surge of power just before. Now, the seven-colored long sword naturally aimed at its next target, the giant crimson bug. Clang, 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 clang. A cambered blood-red light appeared on the surface of this giant crimson bug, blocking the seven-colored sword. Despite its capacity to block the attack, its body was involuntarily pushed back by the sword's shadows, and it kept getting further and further away from Zen. It took a split second for Zen to realize what was happening, but once he did, he turned around and ran, quickly dashing into the pavilion. Clang! Accompanied by a second sound from the top of the pavilion, another surge of power flooded out in all directions. The giant crimson bug wanted to block the seven-colored sword shadows, but it no longer had enough strength to resist the torrent of power. Its body, as tall as a human being, rolled into the air, and in the blink of an eye, it too, was sent flying directly out of the fairy palace. Chapter 1731. Path to the Divine Land. The killing arrays of the fairy palace had been triggered in a specific order. Zen had panicked though, and he had left several powerful killing arrays not activated. However, the seven-colored longsword and the mighty hammer atop the pavilion's roof had done their job. They'd exterminated most of the vicious beasts in the courtyard, and left only corpses of birds, bugs, and giant apes behind. The terrible creatures that had been driven out of the palace were seen circling the walls and searching for a way in. Zen could tell they wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. It was the mammoth, crimson bug that worried Zen the most though. It stared at him with unblinking, blood-red eyes. A hiss slipped from its pincers, making him shiver in disgust. It seemed as if it were trying to speak to Zen. A strange feeling crawled up Zen's spine and made his heart stutter in fear. The voice that echoed in his mind was high-pitched and grating. It wasn't like he could understand the hissing sounds, but he was able to understand the impression and meaning of the words. Such a unique form of communication. Release the item from underground, the bug hissed. We will allow you to leave the swirl forest without causing you any difficulty. We will even gift you with 3 precious fruits. It is a very generous deal. Zen's face was scrunched, expressing just how uncomfortable receiving the message had been. Saul, who was standing nearby, barked out a cold laugh when he noticed Zen's face. It's best to ignore the creature. It must want to release the thing under the palace. Humph, these monsters will never give up. What is buried underneath the fairy palace, exactly? Zen asked, curious. Earlier, Zen had discovered that many of the restrictions and killing arrays in this place were targeted at something hidden underneath the fairy palace. The beasts outside the palace were as strong as true gods, and they must have been clawing their way through to reach this level. Their need was so strong that they were risking their lives to steal what was under the palace. Whatever was down below was incredibly important, Zen was sure. Taking a deep breath, Saul shook his head and said, "It benefits you not to know that now. This thing can affect the rankings of the floating islands in the Time Sea. When the time comes, you'll be told. For now, though, let us drive these foul beasts away." If Zen had been presented with this before now, he would have exploded with hundreds of questions. After experiencing everything he had though, Zen was able to hold himself back. He understood that it might not be prudent for him to know at this time, and he just needed to simply focus on the task at hand. If he knew what was under the palace, it could cause unneeded worries and distractions. Zen met the gaze of the crimson beast and shook his head. "I refuse." Zen did not shout or use his chaotic energy, instead he had spoken calmly and in a soft voice. That didn't seem to hinder the bug from understanding what he said, however, it glared at him in stony silence. A short moment later the shell on its back split open, and it spread its wings to fly away. Countless giant gray bugs followed suit and flew after it. Caw! The piercing screech made Zen flinch. Woo woo woo! The giant apes hollered and howled, echoing the black birds' cries. Then, in an instant, they were gone, following after the crimson bug, and taking their harrowing cries with them. Zen let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It might seem like just a forest in the Divine Land, but there were such powerful creatures lurking within. There were so many of them that Zen hadn't realized they were there. Of course, it is as Father had told me, my path through the Divine Land would only grow more and more difficult, thought Zen. Zen hadn't been able to understand why his father, as a holy being, would create so many obstacles for him. Even going so far as to put him through countless deadly experiences. Only now did Zen understand why. In the universe, Mike could absolutely help Zen make great strides towards his goal. Mike would also be able to make the path much easier for him. However, Mike couldn't protect him forever. After arriving in the Divine Land, Zen had only himself to rely on. If he hadn't put Zen through such grueling experiences, it would have been near impossible for him to survive the Divine Land with such a childish, brutish mentality. If he really considered everything from this point of view, Mike thought things through carefully. Why is this bubble enchanted barrier unable to be activated again? Zen could feel the barrier within his mind, and was able to tell it was unstable in its current state. The bubble enchanted barrier isolates a part of space in the divine land. Naturally it cannot be opened and closed casually as if it were a normal enchanted barrier, Saul explained. Back then, he continued, explaining Bromley's skill, it was already a huge feat for my master to create this enchanted barrier. This bubble enchanted barrier was able to prevent secondary creatures from disintegrating. Having it here was equal to erasing fundamental rules of the divine land to a certain degree, though. It might be limited to just within the fairy palace, but it was precious to the entire divine land. Zen nodded his head in understanding. He intended to bring his family into the fairy palace, so if he helped restore the bubble enchanted barrier, it would be great. He himself was at no risk, but if his loved ones entered and then were to disappear in front of him, Zen didn't know what he'd do. It would be a tragedy. A terrible thought crossed Zen's mind. If the fairy palace's bubble enchanted barrier was forced to shatter at some point, what would happen to those inside? Wouldn't it be extremely dangerous for Letitia and the others to be inside? With this worry at the forefront of his mind, Zen decided that sending his family to the fairy palace would probably be a foolish decision. Zen turned to Saul to express his concern. Saul only smiled. You are overthinking things. No one has broken through the barrier in many years. When this palace was created by your master it was done in the swirl forest, so naturally, he had planned for such a thing. If that were to ever happen though, there is always the training tower to take refuge in. Besides, he truly wanted someone to stay at the palace with him. Especially Jeffrey, that boy always brought fun to him in Immortal book. Afraid that Zen would decide to leave Jeffrey and the others in the universe, Saul continued, the evolutionary universe has been invaded by the race from the Murphy universe. Murphy might not let it go. He might have other means to destroy the universe. Leaving your family there could be dangerous. Zen felt a little comfort at Saul's words. There was no true safe place in the world anymore, and even the holy beings could not protect all the people they wanted to. Not to mention, Zen's current strength was far from what he wanted to achieve. He had to do his best to protect them, and the fairy palace seemed the most promising place at the moment. It would be near impossible to surpass its power unless one was on the same level as the blue-clothed woman. Now, whether or not that woman could also defend herself against the various arrays was another matter entirely. It didn't take long for Zen to make a decision, and he returned to the evolutionary universe from the fairy palace. Zen stayed in the breaking cloud sacred place for a long while before he was ready to send Letitia, Jeffrey, and others to the fairy palace. Margaret knew Zen was planning to enter the divine land soon, so she wanted to enter the fairy palace. She also knew that Zen was able to come and go as he pleased from the fairy palace. Margaret wanted to be there to see him whenever he returned. Her request to leave was turned down by Wynne, though. Margaret, just like all of the godly geniuses, represented the hope that Mike had planted. Although the hope was not great, it represented an infinite number of possibilities. Wynne couldn't allow Margaret to go gallivanting wherever she pleased. Not when he needed her here to continue cultivating. He hoped one day she would have the chance to become a true god. Zen had heartily agreed with Wynne's decision, and it only served to make Margaret angry. It took a long time for Zen to calm Margaret and convince her that staying with Wynne would be the best option. Because of this it had taken him much longer to prepare than he had planned. A month and a half had passed by the time Zen settled everything, and went to find Wynne. Since Wynne's body had been destroyed, he could no longer move freely in the universe. Master Feng had to lead Zen through the universe to reach a northern supreme world of the evolutionary universe. It happened to be the Gem Jade world. There was a small, nameless race occupying this supreme world. It was so minuscule, and it only had 3 world lords. Zen and Wynne kept their arrival a secret from the small race. Once they entered the Gem Jade world, under Wynne's careful instruction, Master Feng directed Zen to continue north. He would continue north until he reached the northernmost tip of the evolutionary universe, and arrived at the Sighing Wall. When Master Feng stopped, Zen asked, "Did Rocher also sneak in from this place?" Wynne shook his head and answered, "No. He did not follow the same route as you." When they were all quiet again, Wynne stepped up to the Sighing Wall. Placing his hand on the wall, a red light started to emanate from Wynne's palm. They watched as the pulsing red light crept out along the wall, and the section of brick seemed to melt away to form a tunnel. Along the tunnel walls and ceiling, blue-veined patterns crisscrossed and spiraled down the path. There wasn't the slightest fluctuation of the space law, and they knew this was the correct path to the divine land. Chapter 1732, The slab's punishment. Before Zen entered the passageway, Win had provided a piece of crucial information. In theory, the godly genius is allowed to enter the divine land. However, if they were to sneak into the divine land, they would be punished by the latter. Hence, ever since the ancient times and up until today, only a very limited few secondary creatures have chosen to sneak their way in. The smuggling will be punished. Win's words had stunned Zen. But I don't understand. When I'm in the fairy palace. That's because you haven't left the swirl forest yet. If you enter the divine land through Holy Bromley's fairy palace, even if you manage to leave the swirl forest safely, you'll still be punished. This rule was amended by the Zhang clan. After the Zhang clan had taken charge of the ascension, they helped the holy beings in the Hall of Holy Beings in guiding the secondary creatures who ascended. Every single creature who ascended to the divine land would be recorded from then on. The warriors who successfully ascended to the divine land were considered valuable resources to the holy beings. After all, martial artists that ascended from their own universe were all true gods, and they relied solely on themselves when it came to condensing their own godly tiles. True gods like these were also viewed as extremely popular talents across the divine land. Following countless years of development though, the Hall of Holy Beings had formulated a set of detailed rules in order to balance out the interests of the various great clans as well as the holy beings. Those who ascended to the divine land were actually distributed according to the floating island's ranks. The powerful warriors that a few holy beings cultivated in their inner worlds were taken away by others, which caused them to become displeased and angry. And thus during a good period of time, a great number of warriors were stolen into the divine land. Certain holy beings even brought their inner world's godly geniuses directly into the divine land for training. In a fit of rage, the Zhang clan immediately changed the rules on the stone slab in order to restrict the holy beings from doing such a thing. The few martial artists that still dared to steal their way into the divine land would certainly receive the stone slab's punishment. From then on, only very few secondary creatures dared to secretly immigrate the land. After all, the stone slab's rules were not to be violated by anyone. I've never heard of such a serious matter in the past. Why have you never mentioned this before? Zen asked in bewilderment. Win smiled slightly. Master has already taken this question into consideration. Zen suddenly remembered something. My blood. Win nodded briskly. Yes, the blood that has been inherited by the celestial position race was prepared for the godly geniuses. This kind of blood can avoid tracking and punishment, but those who utilize it will ultimately face unpredictable consequences. If they hadn't swapped Zen's blood though, then Murphy would discover him the very moment he set foot in the divine land. At this point, the serious consequence could only be imagined. Zen had no idea at the time of his blood transfer that the golden blood even had such a function. He then asked, what are the unpredictable consequences? This time, Win shook his head in dismay. There is no way to tell. This matter can only be left up to fate. After all, avoiding the stone slab's punishment is far from being an easy matter. Even Murphy wouldn't succeed. Are you saying even a holy being can't escape the punishment? Zen was slightly surprised, but he felt gutted. Win smiled calmly. It doesn't matter anymore. This is the only chance you have. You have no idea how much effort your father has put in to achieve this. Zen nodded, his eyes glimmering. I see. After bidding farewell to Win and Master Feng, Zen stepped into the passageway. The passageway didn't actually pierce through the sighing wall, but was instead only a very special space passageway placed on the sighing wall. The law within was completely different from the space law that Zen knew. He couldn't even feel the fluctuation of any law power. He felt so lost and disoriented. The moment Zen stepped inside, he felt an irresistible force wrap around him. At the same time, he felt himself being pulled towards the depths of the passageway. Suddenly, his entire body began to twirl at high speeds, like a spinning top. While this process occurred, Zen tried to control the shape of his body and stop the spinning. It certainly didn't take long before he discovered that he was unable to use the space law, nor was he able to fly here in this passageway. Zen now understood that after stepping into this passageway, he had already entered the divine land. After all, his feeling in this situation very much resembled his feeling in the fairy palace's divine land space. Thus, Zen let himself go, his only option being to spin along the passageway. The sense of space and time gradually blurred within Zen's mind. He felt as though what he had just experienced was spread over a short period of time, and yet simultaneously, he felt as though it had taken him an extremely long time to cross what seemed to be an endless path. An unknown amount of time had passed. Zen literally had no idea, before his body suddenly felt lighter. The force that had wrapped around him earlier disappeared, and with a loud bang, he suddenly fell down. Am I in the air? The vegetable patch. Zen's reaction time was extremely fast. Despite spinning so rapidly, he could still see the scenery around him. Below him was a square of vegetable patch. Boom! Not even a few seconds later, Zen crashed flat into the vegetable patch. If Zen's body were to smash into a vegetable patch, it had the possibility of creating a huge hole with a radius of at least 10,000 feet. That, though, was only a possibility within the universe. The universe was constructed from life vitality, while the divine land, on the other hand, was formed by the chaotic energy. The difference of the two was like the difference between a secondary creature and an ordinary creature. The materials sourced within the divine land were naturally different, too. After Zen smashed into the vegetable patch, he looked around himself, only to notice that he had created nothing more than a small crater and a few crushed seedlings. Thanks to Zen's strong physical body, he had avoided injured. What he did have now was a deep impression of this hard vegetable patch. Prior to this experience, he thought only the swirl forest could be so sturdy. Now, he finally understood that everything in the entire divine land was probably of such strength. Just as Zen fell from the sky, in the depths of the divine land, a line of small characters suddenly flashed with a faint light on a stone slab behind the Hall of Holy Beings. Quickly after this light flashed, it turned into a palm print that shot out from the stone slab. Once the lightning bolt had shot out, sudden sounds rang out surprisingly from the depths of the divine land. What is going on here? Why did the stone slab let the punishment descend again? The 833rd rule has been activated. Someone is sneaking in from somewhere in the universe. But it's so strange. This is the second time someone has stolen into the divine land recently. After the palm print shot out, it disappeared from the time sea and quietly fled through the vast space of the divine land. Soon, it appeared once again, but in a different, particular region. Crack! Just as Zen came back to his senses, he saw a giant palm print appear with a burst in the sky. The very second he noticed the lightning, fear completely washed over him and broke out in a cold sweat. He knew what that black palm print meant. The power it contained was enough to kill him 1,000 times over. Therefore, upon seeing the lightning bolt, he also mourned himself silently in his heart. This time, he was probably done for. He also thought that he didn't deserve such treatment, to be beaten to death by this palm when all he had done so far was to enter the divine land. After the palm print was in full view, it didn't hesitate a second longer before striking down toward Zen. By the time it was halfway toward Zen, he felt his body suddenly warming up as the golden blood in his body began to burn. Simultaneously, the palm print seemed confused, having lost its target, and it looked like a headless fly circling over and over again 10 miles above Zen's head. It just wasn't capable of locking down on Zen anymore. So that's how it is. Zen thought to himself. He looked up at the sky, a faint smile now slowly spreading on his lips. He instantly understood that Win had been right. The golden blood could indeed help him escape punishment. This black palm print continued circling around for quite a while but never found Zen. After some time, it turned into a black ball and came crashing down from the sky. This is bad. Zen's thoughts were whirling now. Immediately upon seeing the scene, he knew something was wrong. He turned his head and ran toward the other side of the vegetable patch. The moment the black ball hit the ground, it exploded, sending out several clumps of black threads. The threads interwoved themselves in order to form a huge web that spread out in all directions. This web spread at an extremely high speed. Even though Zen was running as fast as his legs could carry him, the web wasn't escapable. Swish, swish, swish. Strands of black, hair-like threads shot toward and into Zen's body. These black threads didn't cause any substantial physical damage to Zen's body, but they tightly wrapped around his cinnabar field. And after his cinnabar field was completely bounded, he immediately felt as though he had lost contact with his inner world. This can't be happening. Zen suddenly felt overwhelmingly shocked and confused. Win had reminded him on several occasions that there might be unpredictable consequences, and Zen was well prepared. Despite that, he never expected that the consequence he would face would be one like this. His own cinnabar field was sealed and he was unable to extract the chaotic energy and strength source within. Thus, he lost the two greatest things that he relied on. Chapter 1733, Crickets. The strands of black thread were like thick locks of hair. A part of them fused into Zen's body and coiled around his cinnabar field, and the rest just disappeared. He looked at the blue sky and let out a long exhale. It had been a long day. He was greatly disappointed that his cinnabar field was sealed, but at least he was still alive. That was good, right? Zen sighed. Looking far into the distance, a rich vegetable field caught his attention. Its wide expanse was out of this world, the lush green fields extending as wide as the ocean. And now, he was standing in the middle of it. What is this place? Though ruled by true gods and holy beings, there were also mortals with low levels of cultivation that lived in the divine land. Could it be that this vegetable field was theirs? No, Zen frowned. The soil under his feet was soil of the divine land. Even the warriors at the Soul Sea realm or Spirit Supreme realm would have to exert much effort to reclaim this field. Ordinary mortals wouldn't be able to move a piece of dirt. Then these seedlings. Zen reached for a seedling and studied it closely. He could not identify what type it was, but it was certainly a tough one. It didn't break under Zen's fingers when he casually pinched it, and only when he had used 1% of his strength did the seed break. Huh, muttered Zen, this is tougher than a sacred weapon in the evolutionary universe. Obviously, these vegetables weren't for ordinary mortals to eat. What mortal could bite a sacred weapon to pieces? Right now, Zen regretted not asking Win about the local customs of the divine land. That way, he would have known a little more about this place, and he wouldn't be so lost. Refusing to wander aimlessly, Zen chose a direction and started to trek. Although he couldn't fly or travel through space in the divine land, he had an extremely strong physique and his running speed wasn't too slow. What he didn't expect, however, was that 6 hours later, when he had traveled 10,000 miles, he was still in the lush green vegetable field. This field was endless. Zen was distraught. No matter which angle he looked at it, this world just didn't seem real. Was this preposterous illusion really the divine land? Zen took a moment to calm himself before continuing on his way. There was no use panicking. No matter how big this field was, Zen believed that it ended somewhere. It would just take some more time and effort to reach its edge. As he ran, Zen observed the black threads that were coiled around his cinnabar field. At first, Zen wanted to use his power to cut off the threads, but the cinnabar field was the most important and most fragile part of a martial artist, so he had to be careful. But then, he discovered that the black threads were intertwined with his cinnabar field, so it was impossible to remove them without destroying the cinnabar field. Now, he found that the threads were eroding under his blood circulation. The strands on the side of his cinnabar field had become much thinner and seemed to be on the verge of breaking. This golden blood actually has such use. Zen thought excitedly. If his cinnabar field was always sealed, it would be a genuine concern to Zen. Once he encountered some powerful enemy, he would have no way to resist. The golden blood had the ability to avoid the black palm print, and now he found out it had miraculous effects on the black threads too. Zen forced the blood in his veins to surge into the cinnabar field. This would be suicide for ordinary mortals, but for Zen, it wouldn't be a problem even if his internal organs moved. Directing a large amount of golden blood to his cinnabar field should be a piece of cake and cause no damage to him. And so, Zen tried to remove the black threads as he continued to run. Night came eventually. The lush green field disappeared from Zen's view and was replaced by a dark world. A white moon hung in the sky. It seemed that even in the divine land, a moon shone. Every holy being tried their best to create the perfect universe for themselves, their work oftentimes influenced by the divine land. It was just how the minds of living beings worked. For example, when a person saw a ship for the first time and decided to create one themselves, the ship they would build would be affected by their previous experience. Therefore, the moon before his eyes was the one true moon. Along with the night came a thick layer of fog that covered the vegetable field. It was eerily quiet, and only rustling sounds could be heard as Zen ran across the field. Da. Zen stopped in his tracks. What? He did a 180 as he scanned his surroundings carefully. A look of vigilance flashed through his eyes. He held his breath and listened attentively. It was completely silent. No wind, no sounds. Zen frowned but resumed running nonetheless. Da. He had just taken a step forward, then there it was again. Zen stopped and turned to the direction of the sound, but it had stopped already. Now, he was certain that something was following him. Closing his eyes, he released his soul power and searched the perimeter. Everything around him was reflected in his mind, however, there really were only hard soil and seedlings around. What the heck? Zen shook his head and began to walk again. But as soon as he stepped forward, he heard the sound again. And as soon as he stopped and looked back, the sound disappeared. It was very strange. In the end, Zen simply ignored it and kept running at high speed. In a few seconds, he was able to cover several miles. He was as fast as a shooting arrow. However, it didn't take longer than that for him to figure out where the sound was coming from. In the space in front of him, a black cricket the size of a puppy had appeared, and every time its hind legs pushed off the ground, a dull patter sound was made. This cricket is following me. Zen's eyebrows had raised slightly. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a swarm of black insects pop out, all of them as big as a puppy. Soon, Zen was surrounded. Click, 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 jumping sounds filled the night as the army of crickets gathered around Zen. Squeak, 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 squeak. The crickets began chirping. The sound that hundreds of crickets made was deafening, as if the crickets were the only creatures that existed in this world. It did not last very long, though. After they conversed for a while, the area became quiet once again. However, the crickets which glowed under the full moon looked at Zen with greedy eyes. They were looking at him like food. Zen made a face. Were you discussing how to divide me among yourselves? Clatter. One of the crickets jumped up. As the puppy-sized cricket leapt into the air, it spread its wings and swooped down towards Zen. But just as it got close, a fist sent it flying to the other direction. Zen had a surprised look on his face as he clenched his right fist and looked at the cricket that was thrown away by him. Even though his cinnabar field was sealed, his physical strength and the power in the 8-path platforms couldn't be underestimated. At least this strength was 10 times that of an ordinary world lord. Zen frowned and pursed his lips. His punch should have shattered the cricket, but there it was, unscathed. Chapter 1734. A Little Boy. After the first cricket was smashed into the air, all the other crickets started moving. Click, click, click. The crickets charged forward astonishingly fast. In the blink of an eye, they were firmly wrapped around Zen. Obviously, they wanted to take advantage of their large numbers to devour him completely. But they soon discovered a big problem. Their originally invincible mouth parts couldn't seem to tear the prey in front of them, nor could they leave any wounds on Zen's body. Zen sighed as he was pressed down at the bottom. Although the black insects couldn't hurt him, he was still rather flustered. Then, he rolled up and stomped heavily on the ground. And the insects under his feet were stomped into the earth. If Zen was in a universe, he would have been able to shake the earth with a single stomp, and maybe even a whole valley would have collapsed. But now, he caused only a small hole between the grass and not a single cricket was trampled to death. But with the help of this force, Zen managed to soar straight into the air, shaking off the crickets attached to his body and landing heavily somewhere not too far away. These crickets seemed to possess some incredibly powerful concealing abilities, able to avoid the soul power Zen released. However, their strength was not strong, and they would probably be considered the lowest level of life forms within the divine land. Click, click, click. When the crickets saw Zen escape, they all made another leap, spreading their wings and chasing him in the air. Zen heaved a sigh. He wouldn't be able to walk out this lush and verdant vegetable field in a short time anyway. Since these reckless insects were attacking him, he didn't bother to run away. He would just stay to play with them for a while to kill time. Immediately after he closed his eyes, the surface of his soul in his mind flashed with golden light. After it lit up, it instantly spread over the whole surface of his soul. Then, small golden swords began circling Zen's soul. Apart from using his cinnabar field, Zen could also use his soul power. When the swarm arrived, Zen suddenly opened his eyes. A golden light suddenly surged from his pupils. Swish, 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 swish. The golden lights contained sharp auras, all of them like many small invisible arrows. These arrows looked incredibly real, and back then, they could even shatter a cliff wall. But what made these small arrows truly powerful were their soul attacks. The crickets' defensive power was incredibly strong, withstanding the attacks of Zen's fleshly body. But as the lowest level of creatures, their souls were pitifully weak. Zen's auras spread far and wide like countless small sharp arrows, shooting out. When an arrow pierced through a cricket's head, it shattered its very soul. Puff, 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 puff. After the crickets' souls were obliterated, their bodies fell onto the vegetable field. They had no chance of resistance whatsoever. One by one, the crickets before Zen were killed by his gaze, but the crickets that followed continued to charge. Gradually, the cricket corpses turned into a small mountain as they piled up in front of Zen. They only had their souls destroyed, they weren't completely dead. As their bodies weren't affected, their strong legs still moved and trembled. The insects also possessed a certain level of intelligence. Seeing how their comrades had suffered heavy casualties, the last few crickets finally understood that Zen wasn't good prey. So in a series of dense patters, the surrounding crickets all ran away. Zen smacked his lips and turned away, ready to continue on his journey. But as his gaze swept across the area, he saw a streak of fire approaching him. The fog clouded his vision and he assumed that his fight with the crickets had attracted other beasts. But after the glow of fire pierced through the thick fog, Zen heaved a sigh of relief. Emerging from the mist was a gigantic bull the size of an elephant. It had a pair of red horns and its eyes emitted a faint cyan light. It looked extraordinary, and what rode on its back made Zen let his guard down even more. On the massive bull's back was a little boy with a torch in hand. To Zen, the child was like an oasis in the desert. Although Zen had planned on merely sticking to one direction until it led him out of the field, he had no idea how long it would take him to make it. Perhaps someone could tell him the fastest way to go. Zen had just entered the divine land, completely unfamiliar with the place. He had no idea of the rules and customs of the divine land, so it was a good opportunity to learn from the little boy. Ah, so many dead lacewings. What's going on? The boy had big, curious black eyes and fair skin. He was rather adorable. Somehow, he didn't notice Zen standing behind the pile of corpses, which the boy seemed happy to happen upon. So apparently, these crickets were called lacewings. The corner of Zen's mouth curled slightly. He had already obtained the first piece of information. Seeing how happy the little boy was, Zen concluded that killing these insects was beneficial to the boy. They could have either been precious objects or pests of the field, or both. With that in mind, Zen took a step forward. I was the one who killed these lacewings. Ah, with the surrounding area pitch black and windy, the boy seemed familiar with the field, daring to ride the bull into it alone. But when a stranger suddenly appeared out of nowhere, the torch in his hand began to tremble. Who are you? The little boy raised his voice a little, staring at Zen. Zen cupped his hands meekly and said, I was just passing by and got lost. I'm sorry. Lost? The little boy then rolled his eyes, a hint of cunning flashing across them. Although it was only for a split second, Zen noticed the change. But then the boy laughed. Even if you got lost, why did you come to my vegetable field? How do you plan on getting out? I'm heading north, so I think I'll find a way out eventually, Zen answered truthfully. While on guard, he thought he might find a chance to get out with the boy. You can find a way out by heading north. The boy laughed even louder. Heading north? What a joke. Let's see if you can find your way out in 100 years. The comment secretly shocked Zen. Although he had heard that the divine land was extremely vast, he didn't expect it to be so massive that with his speed alone, he needed 100 years to make it out of a vegetable field. Seeing Zen's expression, the little boy smiled again. What I said is the truth. You are fortunate to have met me today. Otherwise, you would never be able to leave this place. Get on, let my Ed take you. The boy said, patting the back of the huge bull. The enormous bull stood about 30 feet tall with an extremely broad back. A dozen people could have probably fit on there with ease. Seeing the boy's sincerity, Zen thought he might have just been overthinking too much. Without any more hesitation, he took a step forward and jumped onto the bull's back. The boy patted the bull's back and said, Ed, take me back. The giant bull began moving forward with its head bowed. Moving very slowly, the bull was like regular farm cattle plowing the soil. But suddenly, Zen felt a change in the surrounding space as if it was an illusion. Although the bull seemed to be moving slowly, it was still carrying him forward swiftly. There are so many plants in this field, I wonder what they are, Zen remarked cautiously. Though the little boy didn't seem to have any tricks hidden away, Zen figured he had to be careful about everything in the divine land. You don't even know this. Are you from outside? The little boy returned the question. After a moment of hesitation, Zen answered, sort of. All the plants growing here are jade immortal rice, all food for the divine citizens, the little boy explained. The jade immortal rice is exclusive in our vast sky region. It's a specialty. Divine citizens. Vast sky region. Zen could only repeat the words silently in his mind. Chapter 1735, Misunderstanding. The entirety of the divine land was divided into multiple regions. The four largest regions were the east, the west, the north, and the south, and their corresponding divine trees were the ray tree, the sunrise tree, the lofty tree, and the hidden tree. The four divine trees each had their own unique and miraculous abilities. It could also be said that they kept the divine land stable, and it was because of them that the divine land constantly drew in chaotic energy and converted it to vitality between the heaven and earth. In addition to the four great regions and the central time sea, there were many other regions in the divine land as well. Although Zen roughly understood them, he couldn't memorize every single one of them. However, he knew that he was in the vast sky region as of the moment. He had tried to learn about the situation from the little boy on the back of the bull, but the little boy didn't know much and gave him a lot of irrelevant answers. Nevertheless, Zen quickly got a rough grasp of the whole situation. It turned out the so-called divine citizens were actually mortals from the divine land. These divine citizens either did not cultivate or they had mediocre talents. Despite that, they were still much stronger than the mortals in the universe. For instance, they were able to reclaim the vast and boundless vegetable field on their own. Generally speaking, not even a life and death realm warrior in the universe could easily dig out such a vegetable field. Only the warriors of the Soul Sea realm could do so with their physical power, and they could barely even. However, ordinary divine citizens in the divine land could do it. In other words, every single divine citizen of the divine land was born to be a super powerful warrior. It was no wonder when Zen had obtained Holy J's strength source, the holy being warned him that pure power was nothing in the divine land. Such a large vegetable field, how many divine citizens are needed to reclaim it? Zen asked again. The wide vegetable field seemed endless. Thus, it would need a large number of people if they wanted to reclaim it. In any case, Zen wanted to know how many divine citizens lived in the place. However, the little boy just rolled his eyes at Zen and said, "Who said we have to dig up the field ourselves? We have cattle." He patted his head as he spoke, who in turn responded with a low, moo. At that moment, Zen couldn't help but feel a bit awkward when he heard the boy's words. Apparently, the village where the little boy was from only had around 4,000 divine citizens. It was just a nameless little village in the vast sky region. All of those divine citizens depended on farming to make a living, specifically growing jade immortal rice. Although the divine citizens were strong and formidable, they were still unable to absorb the vitality between heaven and earth in the divine land, and it was why they still had to eat grains and other food. Then again, the food in the divine land was different, so it might be the source of the divine citizens' strength. The collapsing mountain race Zen had met in the divine refinement forbidden land were also in the same situation. They ate the flesh of all kinds of beasts, and although they didn't cultivate, they could still become super powerful warriors. The bull continued to walk slowly, and after some time, it finally reached the edge of the vegetable field. When Zen had entered the divine land, he initially saw just a vegetable field. It even gave him the illusion that the divine land was just a vegetable field. Only now did he see some different sights. There was a mountain road at the edge of the vegetable field, and in the middle of the mountain was a lonely village. It was already nightfall, and the village was slowly filled with light from the households. After Ed walked to the village entrance, the little boy suddenly stood up. He smiled at Zen and clapped his hands in a certain rhythm. Shadowy figures appeared after the little boy's claps, and behind the figures were spears. While Zen did not activate his spiritual sense, he still had quite the sensitive soul perception as he felt the figures, killing intent almost instantly. However, they remained hidden in the shadows and did not charge forward. This little boy, he maintained a stoic facade, but he felt like the boy had tried to lure him to this place and signaled to his fellow villagers using the clapping of his hands. He was afraid that he might be in danger. However, he had no ill will towards these divine citizens. Why did they do this? Confusion was written all over his face. Just then, the little boy suddenly moved. Ed underneath him lowered its head, and with a little slip, he slid down the bull's neck and straight to the ground. His body rolled forward, then he swiftly rushed into the village and shouted, "Everyone, quickly make your move." The boy moved in an extremely nimble manner. Zen naturally wanted to stop the little boy from escaping, and he could do that with just a single thought. Yet, he didn't do anything. He wanted to see what the little boy was up to. Moo! Ed beneath Zen's feet let out a cry and also started to shake its back in an attempt to dismantle him. But, Zen's feet were like nails that were firmly hammered into the bull's back. No matter how much Ed swayed, Zen remained perfectly still and standing on its back. "Come on, hurry up, surround that brat, don't let him get away." ... The divine citizens in the dark charged forward at the same time with long spears in their hands. The man at the helm gripped his weapon tightly and stabbed at Zen's face without any hesitation. Whoosh, your strength is actually not bad. If you had hit an ordinary warrior of the Soul Sea realm, then he would probably die or get injured. Unfortunately, the aim is too poor, Zen muttered calmly. Once the divine citizens had made their move, Zen thought that his previous guess was right. They were still different from the collapsing mountain race, though. While the collapsing mountain race had undergone continuous trainings and were considered as proper martial artists, the divine citizens did not receive proper training and only relied on physical strength. Zen thought that if they just stabbed randomly with their spears, how could they possibly hurt him? Zen only had to tilt his head slightly to the side even if he was rained with a barrage of spear attacks. One spear was thrust right through the side of his face. He was only half an inch away from the spear. That divine citizen was startled for a moment, but he thought that he had almost stabbed Zen. He retracted his spear and impaled Zen again, But the second strike ended up the same as the first, it was still a mere half an inch away from Zen's face. At the same time, the other divine citizens also raised their spears and stabbed forward. Even with the many strikes that were all aimed at Zen, all he had to execute was his 8 smoky melodies. His whole body danced lightly on the back of the bull like a willow leaf while all the spears slid a bit too close along his skin. Every strike lacked a tad bit in something, but from start to finish, not even a single spear had been able to touch Zen. Come on everyone, we can't let him escape. Alas, I almost stabbed him to death. He is quite lucky, but it won't last long. The divine citizens had always thought that they were close to stabbing Zen, so they thrust their spears harder with every try. Meanwhile, the boy who hid at one side examined Zen's indifferent expression. His large eyes were wide with shock when he realized that the man on the bull's back was just toying with them. It was known that the divine citizens were not trained professionally. Even though they were exceptionally strong, they couldn't hold out for too long by just using their strength. After less than 2 minutes, many of them were too tired to the point that they were gasping for air. They held their spears and stared at Zen, dumbfounded. The few remaining divine citizens who still persisted decided to stop as well. They weren't stupid. After all this entire time, they hadn't even touched Zen's clothes. Their differences in strength were too much. They all thought that this brat was simply toying with them. Zen stood on the back of the bull and surveyed the divine citizens. Everyone, why did you attack me? He asked coldly. As soon as his voice died down, the divine citizen who was at the helm angrily shouted, "There's no need to say anything else. If you want to kill us, just do it. We members of the Misty Mountain village will not leave this place." Right, this Misty Mountain is a clan land that has been passed down by our ancestors for generations. Why should we let you drive us away? Another divine citizen furiously chimed in. Suddenly, the crowd parted as someone rushed forward. I'm going to kill you. The strongest divine citizen among the lot held his long spear and charged towards Zen once again. Zen raised his eyebrows as he gripped the divine citizen's long spear. The 8-path platforms in his body burst and exerted a powerful force. When the divine citizen stabbed him with the spear, the weapon had gotten crushed with an exploding sound. The rest of the divine citizens were stunned in silence. Is there any misunderstanding here? Zen asked in a deep voice. Chapter 1736, The Proving Godly Warrior. Zen's actions intimidated the excited divine citizens. He slightly understood what they meant when he heard what they said. Some people seemed to be trying to take over the Misty Mountain village and driving the people out. These divine citizens were unwilling to leave though, so their supposed conquerors decided to hire some extra muscles to cause them trouble. When Zen entered the divine land, he immediately fell onto a vegetable field and then eradicated a great crowd of pests there. Soon he was seen by a boy who immediately took him to the village so that the other divine citizens could team up and kill him. Realizing that it was all a misunderstanding, Zen felt the need to clarify things. I am a mere passerby. I unintentionally crashed into that vegetable field. I did not intend to offend anyone. Why did you all attack me though? He murmured faintly. He wasn't angry, not after knowing what was finally going on. Did we misunderstand then? Weren't you sent here by the Sun Moon village? The divine citizens all wavered, seeing the innocent look on Zen's face. Zen shook his head. I haven't even heard of a Sun Moon village before. How can we trust you? One of the divine citizens asked. Just trust me. A friendly smile broke through Zen's face. Then you can trust me. Whoosh. Zen finally left the back of the bull in a flash. Even if he couldn't launch the wind lot of fly, he could still make use of the ingenious movement techniques he had learned in the past. To these divine citizens, it appeared as if he simply vanished like a ghost. They only felt a light breeze brush past them and suddenly, their grips on their spears loosened and they found themselves without their weapons. In just a few seconds, Zen was already standing in the middle of the village gate with a bundle of spears in his hands. Everyone's faces paled in fright. If I had been sent by the Sun Moon village, then all of you would have already been dead, he told them indifferently before throwing the spears on the ground. Nobody uttered a word to dispute Zen's claim. What he said was reasonable. The strength Zen had displayed was enough to kill all of them in one sitting. That much was pretty obvious. However, the divine citizens were still full of hostility and Zen couldn't help but despair in his heart. If it weren't for the fact that he newly crashed here, then he wouldn't have bothered with these divine citizens. He had to remind himself that this was the divine land and not the universe. The first thing he had to do was to integrate himself and not act on impulse. Everyone, please trust him. He is not an assassin sent by the Sun Moon village. A voice shouted from the village. It was a black-haired youth with a long sword strapped to his waist. His eyes were calm and Zen could immediately tell from a glance that he was at the spirit transformation realm. Is he a warrior of this village? Zen thought to himself. He was not afraid of this warrior, but these divine citizens still gave him a strange feeling. They did not have any cultivation base, but each one of them possessed brute force. The sight of this youth at the spirit transformation realm made Zen a bit more comfortable. Willie, what took you so long? One of the divine citizens snapped. Willie scratched his head in embarrassment. I've been here the entire time. I just didn't make a move. This man almost killed us. You're the only warrior here and yet you were the one who hid behind us. You're a disgrace to our Misty Mountain village. That's right. Why didn't you help us beat him up, Willie? All the divine citizens protested in anger. They were almost killed by me. Zen had obviously shown mercy to these divine citizens, so what nonsense were they spouting? Willie rolled his eyes. I'm no match for him either. Even the Sun Moon Village's leader would have some trouble taking him down. His evaluation of Zen's strength shocked the divine citizens to the core. Willie was the strongest warrior and the only hope in their Misty Mountain village after all, and everyone believed what he said. Even the Sun Moon Village's leader would have a hard time against this person. Isn't that too much exaggeration? The divine citizens all wondered. How is that possible? Even if this guy is strong, he can't be on that level. You're just afraid to fight him. That's why you said those things, right, Willie? Willie blinked. His cultivation base is the same as that of the Sun Moon Village's leader. He's also a proving godly warrior. Proving godly warrior. He's a world lord. He's that powerful. The divine citizens all looked at Zen in wide-eyed fear. It was obvious that they all thought of him as a monster. The term, proving godly warrior, was unfamiliar to Zen. However, the moment world lord was mentioned, Zen immediately understood. In the universe, the Supreme Lord was usually the strongest warrior, but a world lord could only become one after being granted a heavenly destiny. The Supreme Lord was, essentially, a title. There were very few true gods in the universe and most were usually brought over to the divine land by the Zhang clan. Not a lot of people really knew the true gods. Rochet's achievement, for example, was only made known to a small portion of the celestial position. It was different here in the divine land. There were many true gods here. After becoming a world lord, ordinary creatures that weren't restricted by the heavens would naturally attest to the godly way and try to become a true god. This was the reason why world lords were also called proving godly warriors. Am I right? Willie smiled and asked for confirmation from Zen. He didn't really know Zen's cultivation base since he could only see through warriors whose cultivation bases were at the Spirit Supreme realm and below. However, since he couldn't perceive Zen's cultivation base, then that only meant that he was higher, a world lord. Zen nodded. Yes, I am indeed a proving godly warrior. Willie cupped his hands and bowed. I'm sorry if they were too rash. I apologize on behalf of our village. If you would allow us to show you the accorded hospitality, please come over and have a chat. The little boy who hid behind Willie suddenly rushed out. Willie, is he really not a bad person that the Sun Moon Village sent? A look of doubt flashed through his eyes. He had spent a great deal in trying to lure Zen over, and it was incredibly unexpected for things to have become like this. Willie smacked the boy hard on the forehead. You've got the nerve. All of this was caused by you. If he truly was from the Sun Moon Village, then you would have been dead by now. His words immediately eased the tension. The divine citizens all seemed to believe Willie's words and felt that Zen had no enmity towards them at the very least. With the misunderstanding solved, Willie led the way and took Zen to the largest building in the village. Inside the building was a brazier located at the very center. On top of the brazier was a large pot that seemed to be cooking something and emitted a thick fragrance of meat. Zen couldn't help but stare at the fire. However, he couldn't see through the logs that were contained within the flames. His gaze then went to the logs on the bottom of the brazier, and he immediately understood that it was this precious pile that gave the flames such a strange quality. No wonder Livingston was so excited when he saw the materials in the fairy palace. Rare and precious logs such as these were used as kindling for cooking by common divine citizens. The divine citizens were all very accommodating to Zen and treated him as a guest. A proving godly warrior was a very high status in their eyes after all. Where did you come from, sir? Willie asked. Why did you come here to our Misty Mountain village? Even when he was still in the universe, Win had already taught Zen a set of excuses to answer any question that might endanger his real identity. I'm Thad Luo. I came from another region and got lost when I went into the vast sky region. I accidentally broke into that vegetable field. Zen narrated sheepishly, but in his mind, all the information he gave was tied in an orderly manner. You got lost in the vast sky region. Wooly murmured in astonishment, disbelief written all over his face. Chapter 1737, Zen's Guidance. Zen certainly knew that if he made up any kind of story, there would always be something he couldn't explain clearly. Little details and crucial parts would usually be a dead giveaway in a false story. However, if he provided less information instead, it was less likely that they would discover that he was a liar. Additionally, it didn't matter whether they believed all of his words or not. Moreover, these people were just some divine citizens. It was impossible for them to find out anything about his background. For those citizens, they would easily dismiss Zen as a random passerby. Just as Zen had expected, Wooly did not pursue the topic any longer. Instead, he told Zen honestly that their little mountain village was quite remote in the vast sky region. Even the nearest divine city was very far away. As such, a smile shone in Wooly's face as he invited Zen to stay in the Misty Mountain Village first. The Misty Mountain Village faced a great enemy and Zen was a proving godly warrior. Ever since he arrived at their village, their invitation was completely within Zen's expectations. He gladly accepted the offer. After he witnessed that Zen had agreed to stay, Wooly immediately beamed with pleasure. "My friend, I bet you must be wearied by your long journey. It must have been a long way before you arrived here. Brother, go and fetch 2 jugs of our best wines for our honored guest." Afterward, Wooly opened the large pot in front of him. A rich aroma of meat suddenly filled the entire place. Zen hadn't eaten any food for a long time. As such, he immediately felt his appetite stir the moment he smelled the aroma of the meat. A loud growl was heard in his abdomen. Based on Wooly's introduction, the meat stewed in the pot had been peeled off from the iron-toothed beast. As a spirit transformation realm warrior, Wooly didn't need to eat food as well. However, he still ate the meat of the iron-toothed beast, which had the function to increase his strength. For the true gods, the beast was considered nothing. Nonetheless, it was a precious ingredient for the divine citizens. Zen politely ate a few cuts of meat and immediately felt a warm sensation in his stomach. The energy from the meat was even purer than that of the top-level beasts in the divine refinement forbidden land. At once, the power from the meat surged throughout Zen's body. However, Zen was not surprised by what happened. The divine refinement forbidden land was the inner world of Holy J. As such, the living creatures there were formed by the vitality between heaven and earth that Holy J had absorbed. They were still secondary creatures. Although the iron-toothed beast had a low level, it was still an ordinary creature. It was formed by chaotic energy, so it was essentially different from all secondary creatures. The meat stew was a very delicious meal. After they had their fill, the villagers of Misty Mountain Village arranged a comfortable loft for Zen to stay in. Zen naturally didn't need to sleep. However, he was still in a predicament because his elixir field was still sealed. Along the way, Zen had tried his best to control the golden blood in his body to wash away the black lines on his elixir field. But these black lines were unusually stubborn, and he had managed to break only several of them. A lot of them still remained and clogged his elixir field. He was extremely anxious about the situation. The restoration of his strength as soon as possible was Zen's greatest goal at the current stage. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to travel around the divine land. He would be easy prey for the beasts that wandered it. Worse, he could be targeted by strong warriors. Additionally, based on the information he gathered, the village had enemies. The village was still peaceful and safe when Zen arrived. However, the danger of an enemy attack still lingered. Wooly even informed him that there were quite a few warriors in the Sun Moon village. Also, among them were some formidable proving godly warriors, namely warriors of a world lord's level. Zen had fought world lords from the divine land in the past. A few years ago in the divine refinement forbidden land, there were many divine land geniuses that had been defeated by him. Most of them were from the great clans in the divine land. However, they were still no match against Zen. However, with his elixir field sealed, the methods that Zen could use were very limited. His strength had been greatly reduced, thus, made him very weak. A rather weaker and easily defeated enemy would be enough to give Zen a hard time. Darkness surrounded the village. Night came by with a cold breeze. As time went by, the sun had also begun to rise. Zen was relentless as he willed his golden blood to wash over his elixir field. However, he only broke 4 more black lines. There were more than 100 of them intertwined around his elixir field. It seemed that it would take him at least a month to break all of them. Desperation crept in Zen's mind. He stopped his meditation and sighed helplessly. All he could do was shrug with disappointment. Suddenly, he heard a series of high-pitched sounds from outside. Curiosity had enveloped Zen. "Hold your sword tight and widen your eyes. Gather your strength, and stride squarely. The sun had not yet fully risen. However, multiple swords were heard as they clashed with each other from outside the house. Even though it was just the break of dawn, dozens of warriors already held swords and sparred with each other. Zen stood up and pushed open the door. As he laid eyes on the field, he saw Wooly with a cyan steel sword. Systematic strikes and slashes were magnificently displayed by Wooly. The movements displayed by Wooly were unfamiliar to Zen. However, Zen's comprehension of swordsmanship had already reached the level of ripping consciousness. He had long since far surpassed the level of a Grand Master and had profound insight about swordsmanship. He could tell with a single glance that this set of sword skills was extremely simple and crude. A chuckle almost escaped Zen's lips as he was amused by the sight in front of him. It seems that these divine citizens aren't more advanced than secondary creatures in every aspect. Their swordsmanship could really use some improvements, Zen thought to himself. Let alone a spirit transformation realm warrior, even an ordinary life and death realm or soul sea realm warrior from his universe could be regarded as a grand master of swordsmanship. Most warriors from Zen's universe practiced many sets of excellent sword skills. However, although Wooly was at the spirit transformation realm, the sword skills he used were rather ordinary. It was just a variant of the basic swordsmanship, which was far less flexible. Wooly would be easily defeated by most warriors from Zen's universe when it was about swordsmanship. Zen pondered over it, curious eyes painted his face. Immediately, he quickly understood the reasons. The divine citizens were born with spectacular strength. If they could absorb the vitality between heaven and earth in the divine land and advance in their cultivation levels, they could open up their soul sea and become a soul sea realm warrior. The soul sea realm warriors in the divine land had equivalent status to nature creatures in the lower world of Zen's universe. Additionally, they had just started their martial path. As a spirit transformation realm warrior, Wooly was only slightly stronger than an ordinary person. He was a villager of a remote village, so it was incredible enough that he could reach the spirit transformation realm. It was nearly impossible for him to get any advanced sword skills to learn. The distance of the village to civilization had hindered any advanced sword techniques to be integrated by its warriors. Along with Wooly, a group of children also diligently practiced. The kids probably couldn't get a sword, so they could only use branches and sticks instead. However, their determination was still apparent in children's expressions. They were quite serious as they imitated Wooly's movements. These branches should be valuable enough to exchange for a high-quality sacred weapon in our universe. As this thought passed through his mind, Zen smiled softly. No matter where he went, there were always people who were dedicated to the martial arts. With a calm and appreciative expression, he walked down the stairs of the house. Be serious. Adjust your stance properly. As he noticed Zen's presence, Wooly started to wave the sword in his hand even harder. Nonetheless, the children failed to keep up with his rhythm and all reeled right and left. There was only one child who could barely catch up with Wooly's movements. He was the boy who carried Zen out of the vegetable field the night before. Zen already knew that the boy's name was Thompson. Additionally, he was Wooly's younger brother. As he noticed Wooly's messy footsteps, Zen stood with his hands behind his back and approached Wooly. With a callous face, he said indifferently, "You should learn to move swiftly before you learn how to use the sword. The words, 'stride squarely,' in your chant is wrong. The sword can be used flexibly in a fight. If one only strides squarely, it will affect the flexible movements of the hands. If the sword loses its flexibility, then what is the need for learning it? You might as well use a spear instead." Although his words sounded harsh and direct, Zen was more than qualified to make such comments on swordsmanship. His battle experience and prowess were above anyone in the village. However, Wooly, with his back to Zen, suddenly winked at his younger brother. A small message was secretly shared between the two. As he received his brother's signal, Thompson dropped the wooden sword in his hand and turned to Zen. With a pouty face, he said, "Humph, what nonsense are you spouting? My brother's swordsmanship was learned from Mirror City. This set of sword skills is very extraordinary. Why do you criticize it so severely?" Zen raised an eyebrow. When he pushed open the door and saw how poorly Wooly practiced swordsmanship with the group of kids, he already realized it was just for show. Wooly and the others originally wanted Zen to teach them some sword skills. Since Zen was a warrior from outside the village, they considered his knowledge to be beneficial to them. With playful eyes, Zen stared at Thompson. Although he still wore a smile on his face, Zen emitted a faint aura. The aura was not meant to kill anyone, but it was enough to make the boy feel some pressure. Despite Thompson's smart mind, his expression immediately turned frantic and his face paled when Zen stared at him tightly. The faint aura released by Zen had intimidated everyone in the field. Even the other children also looked at Zen in a daze with fears on their faces. As he saw the children's nervous expressions, Zen's heart softened. Why did he have to blame a group of children? He turned to Wooly and said, "If you want any guidance from me, you can just say it directly. I'm not a stingy person, so you don't have to do this just to trick me into teaching you. I am more than willing to help you improve your skills." When Wooly and the children heard this, their faces were filled with a pleasant surprise. They had rehearsed for a long time for this moment. They wanted to prod Zen to teach them as they displayed pathetic swordsmanship. However, it was actually fine for Zen to be their master. It seemed that they had wasted all their efforts. In the divine land, cultivation was not something that normal divine citizens could engage in. They couldn't easily attain the necessary requirements to improve their cultivation. There just weren't enough accessible pills, cultivation methods, resources, and even masters. To the divine citizens, those were things that they couldn't even reach. As such, the godly way tablets for cultivation were only a legend to most divine citizens. Although Zen was not a true god, as a proving godly warrior, he could still be a good teacher to them. However, they had never thought that Zen would agree to teach them so easily. All of them started to form a sense of admiration towards him. After Zen had finished his words, he took a step forward and waved his hand toward Thompson. The wooden sword in the boy's hand suddenly flew into Zen's hand. Thompson revealed a surprised expression. Although this wooden sword was a toy for a child, it actually weighed over 10,000 pounds. Thompson was only 7 or 8 years old, but he was still a divine citizen. His strength could not be measured by the standard of the universe. A divine citizen would naturally be born with spectacular strength compared to secondary creatures. To learn to use a sword, you should learn to move swiftly first. Take a good look. As he finished his remarks, Zen took a step forward and started to shift left and right. He was using the sword step that he hadn't used in a long time. Incredible footwork was witnessed by Wooly and the children. Chapter 1738. Pursue the Godly Way. Once Zen began to exhibit his set of sword step, the eyes of Wooly, Thompson and a few other children immediately lit up. All of them were in awe of Zen's magnificent display of skill. Due to the eagle sword skill that Wooly had used previously, Zen had already understood the strangeness of the divine land. The cultivation methods, which were practiced by the disciples supported by the true gods, were extremely exquisite. Each disciple would cultivate many of those methods in their lifetime. Perhaps those methods were inherited from the comprehension of holy beings and later inherited from the godly ways. However, the distance between divine citizens and those disciples was extremely far. As such, their abilities were also vastly different. When the divine citizens finally grew up, they would naturally have incredible strength. Additionally, their perception would be several times better than those of the divine land's martial artists. However, it was difficult for the divine citizens to even get a chance to learn some of the most basic martial arts of the universe. Zen had no idea how such a situation had developed. Pity and disappointment were in his eyes. Perhaps it was because the little mountain village was too remote. Or maybe, it was because the situation had been developed in the divine land for countless years. Nonetheless, their predicament should be addressed as soon as possible. Although the divine citizens did not possess any powerful martial arts manuals, their physiques were still powerful and they had extraordinary perception. Each of them meticulously watched Zen's movements. After Zen finished his sword step, the eyes of Wooly and the children were full of admiration. Who? After Zen ascended to the upper world, it was no longer important to fight against a martial artist with sword moves. As such, most of the cultivation methods he had gathered over the years became less useful. There were many cultivation methods that he could only discard. But since there were so many restrictions within the divine land, Zen also understood that in a fight against those true gods, the cultivation methods he had could often be used to reverse the situation. After he displayed the sword step, Zen put away the wooden sword. He looked at the children and said flatly, "This set of sword step is only the most basic steps of the swordsmanship. However, if you can master it thoroughly, you will be able to lay a solid foundation. You should try your best to comprehend it." When Zen finished his words, Wooly and the other children felt confused. Their eyes, which were earlier filled with admiration, became clouded with bewilderment. They had too little knowledge of martial arts. As their little mountain village was too secluded, they would only receive little information and knowledge, or worse, none at all. Although they knew that the sword step was profound, how could they comprehend the profoundness behind it in such a short time? As he saw their puzzled expressions, Zen curled his lips. These guys seemed to be even more ignorant than he had imagined. When he first comprehended the sword step, he purely followed the rhythm of Rocher's movements to practice it. It could be said that he mastered the sword step almost on his own. It seemed that the divine citizens could not understand such things. It must also be the first time they encountered such knowledge from outside the village. "I'll demonstrate it again," Zen said patiently. The expression on his face had grown rather amused. "Wait, I think I can do it, let me have a try." Thompson stood up and asked Zen for his wooden sword. As Thompson shook the sword lightly, his left leg slid across the ground as if it was gliding over a piece of ice. With this step, he immediately became extremely nimble. His movement could still be improved, but it was a lot better than before. Hoo. Thompson's movements were still much slower than Zen's. After he took the first step, Thompson would have to think for a while before he could continue to slide forward. Additionally, even after he pondered, he would sometimes even take the wrong step. However, he had still integrally practiced the sword step that Zen had just displayed. Such a feat was pretty marvelous for his first try. After he withdrew his sword, Zen approached Thompson. With a gentle face, he praised Thompson. "Not bad. Although you are not that nimble, you've already grasped the concept. Otherwise, it would be impossible for you to remember all of my movements. Your comprehension is better than others." As he heard Zen's sincere praise, Thompson was so happy that he almost jumped up from the ground. On the other hand, his brother, Wooly, had a depressed look on his face. A gloomy atmosphere had surrounded him. In the deep mountains of the vast sky region, every village would train their own martial artists. They often raised a warrior to defend their territory. After all, occasionally, vicious creatures would appear in the mountains. Sometimes, those vicious creatures would wreak havoc in the vegetable fields. Some of them would even have disputes with the villagers, which would require the help of the martial artists of the village. Wooly was the warrior of the Misty Mountain village. As such, the village had paid a high price for his cultivation. However, Wooly's talent was average at best. Additionally, the Misty Mountain village was not rich with resources. The village could barely give him the rare resources he needed. Therefore, Wooly's strength was also mediocre. After he saw the talent that his little brother had displayed seemed to far surpass his own, Wooly felt both depressed and happy for his little brother. A mix of admiration and regret crept in his heart. He wondered if he should let his brother become Zen's disciple. Over the next few days, Zen continued to teach the children the sword step. Everyone was very eager to comprehend the profound movements. Zen also saw some benefits in his interaction with the villagers. He could learn more information about the vast sky region. Additionally, since the village provided him a place to stay, he could unravel the black threads in his cinnabar field with ease. The villagers of the Misty Mountain village were all very kind. They knew that Zen was a proving godly warrior. Additionally, he even taught a few children the swordsmanship every day. Naturally, they were very grateful and always made the best food in the village for Zen to eat. At the same time, the villagers had all sorts of speculations about Zen's background. His mysteriousness and kind character created colorful rumors about him. The villagers were not stupid. A proving godly warrior with unknown background stayed in their little village might because the warrior possibly committed some crime and escaped his origins to avoid punishment. However, since the Misty Mountain village was so remote, perhaps no one would be able to find the place. As such, they were not too worried. Zen had been in the Misty Mountain village for more than half a month. Within that period, about half of the black threads in his cinnabar field had already melted away. In another half a month, he should be able to completely get rid of all of those black threads. His strength would finally be rejuvenated. Additionally, Zen had good knowledge of the vast sky region. After those black threads melted away, he would leave the village. The vast region could be finally explored by him. The divine citizens' cultivation talent was not weak. However, it was just that their foundation was too poor. Thus, it was difficult for them to bring out their full strength. With his cultivation base of the spirit transformation realm, Wooly could barely employ the sword step. As such, his movements were still not agile enough. On the other hand, Thompson's talent was indeed beyond Zen's expectations. Even though he had yet to open his soul sea, it only took him 3 days to master the sword step. Such fast comprehension was spectacular even for Zen. Thompson's talent was greater than that of any ordinary people. Even seasoned warriors would be impressed by Thompson's extraordinary talent for comprehension. Therefore, based on Thompson's talent, Zen had developed a new sword technique. He aligned it with the basic sword technique Wooly practiced, with the addition of the sword step. The newly created technique was then imparted to Thompson. Thompson meticulously practiced the sword technique day and night for the past few days. When he saw Zen walk out of the house, he suddenly threw the wooden sword away and knelt down with a plop sound in front of Zen. With a face full of admiration, he pleaded, "Master, please accept me as your disciple." He actually wanted to become Zen's disciple. If it was within the universe, then Zen would indeed have the qualifications to establish his own sect. He would even be able to create a great force within the universe and take Thompson in as a disciple. With his vast knowledge and unparalleled experience in battle, Zen could create a strong and very powerful sect. However, Zen himself was only a proving godly warrior in the divine land. He would face a lot of hardships and dangers in the future. Even if he took Thompson in as his disciple, it would be strenuous to take care of him. It would be very difficult for Zen to protect himself and Thompson at the same time. He faintly smiled and responded, "Sorry. I am unable to take you in as my disciple right now." It was Wooly who wanted Thompson to be Zen's disciple. Wooly knew that Zen gave no high importance to his average talent. If his brother could be accepted as a disciple by a proving godly warrior, it would be much easier for his brother to cultivate. Even though he was full of envy, Wooly still wanted Thompson to improve and get stronger. That was an opportunity Thompson could not miss. However, they didn't expect that Zen would immediately refuse Thompson without a single thought. Zen had been very kind in the past weeks. Both Wooly and Thompson thought that Zen would at least accept one disciple. "Why, I'm very obedient. Please, Master," Thompson stammered as he raised his head. Sadness was apparent in his eyes. Wooly also interjected. With a depressed face, he asked, "That's right. Why can't you take my brother as your disciple?" Zen was naturally unable to explain his origins to them. All he could do was to shake his head indifferently. He looked at Thompson and asked, "Why are you cultivating the martial arts? If you just want to protect the people of the Misty Mountain Village, then you just need to rely on your own talent and the sword skills that I have taught you. You are already brave enough. Practice diligently and you can have the strength to protect them." Although Zen had never come into contact with any other martial artist from the vast sky region, he could deduce the general situation from the performance of the villagers from the Misty Mountain Village. If judged from the cultivation method alone, other than the godly ways and top cultivation methods, the other cultivation methods in the divine land were not superior to those of the universe. After all, almost all of the inheritances in the universes came from the holy beings. Of course, that was only true for the ordinary divine citizens in the divine land. The cultivation methods of the Han clan's members who had encountered Zen in the divine refinement forbidden land were extremely extraordinary. It could even be said that they were powerful enough to challenge Zen. After all, they also had the inheritance of the holy beings. "No," Thompson denied Zen's words. A determined expression painted his face. He then announced with a brave tone, "I cultivate the martial arts not just to protect the Misty Mountain Village. I want to pursue the godly way." After he heard Thompson say such words, Wooly was very shocked. With an open mouth, Wooly gawked at his brother. He had never thought that his brother had such an ideal. In the divine land, there was a huge gap between the divine citizens and true gods. Once one succeeded in the cultivation of the godly way, it meant that they would achieve unlimited lifespan and unlimited possibilities. The godly way was a gateway for limitless power and strength. However, even though the number of true gods in the divine land was large, it did not mean that it was easy to cultivate the godly ways. That particular method of cultivation was very strenuous. The warriors that cultivated the godly ways also rarely succeeded. The vast majority of true gods were born countless divine eras ago. A true god wouldn't die because their lifespan was already inexhaustible. Old age and sickness would mean nothing to them. As such, there were so many true gods out there. However, only a few divine citizens would be able to master the godly ways and become true gods. Chapter 1739, The Invaders. An intense passion was reflected in Thompson's black eyes. It almost seemed that a wildfire had lit up in his pupils. As he looked at Thompson's resolute gaze, Zen's heart was moved. Thompson was like him in his early years, firm and decisive. Such a dedicated character was very respectable. Whether it was the warrior spirit or the godly way, in truth, it was a path of continuous growth. Zen himself didn't know whether there was an end to that path either. However, once warriors set foot in the path of martial arts, they must try hard to make progress. The improvement of their strength and cultivation was an integral part of their lives. If Thompson only wanted to protect Misty Mountain Village, there was no need for him to acknowledge Zen as his master. It would be enough for Thompson to diligently practice by himself. "Sorry. You are very passionate. I commend you for that. However, for now, I can't take you as my disciple," Zen said with a regretful smile. "Not now, but when?" Thompson asked. His eyes flashed with glee. He was surprised that Zen didn't refuse him directly. Zen took a deep breath and looked up at the sky above the vast sky region. A brilliant sun shone across the sky and emitted an intense light. That was a true sun, and also the only sun in the divine land. After some thought, Zen looked deeply at Thompson's passionate eyes. He then replied with a kind voice, "If one day you hear my name in the vast sky region, come look for me." Zen had come for revenge, so the probability of his death was very high. The enemies he wanted to defeat and might encounter were dangerously strong. If he could one day defend himself against Murphy, then he would have the qualifications to establish his own sect within the divine land. He would be able to protect his family by then. Is that the day when you become famous in the vast sky region? Thompson laughed as he gave a playful remark. However, deep in his heart, he believed Zen could achieve something as incredible as that. That is way too difficult. Willie twitched his mouth. He felt that although proving godly warriors were powerful, they were not true gods yet. Although the vast sky region was not that big, there were still a lot of true gods within it. Even if Zen actually became a true god, it would be still difficult for him to become famous in the vast sky region. Willie didn't know that what Zen wanted was not just to become famous in a certain region, but to gain a foothold in the divine land, on the floating islands of the Time Sea and in the Hall of Holy Beings. Zen's ambition was not just to achieve prestige but to gain and develop his own territory and influence. "It's all right, I can wait, Master, I believe that you can do that." Thompson was full of confidence in Zen. The expression on Thompson's face was full of admiration. Thompson's heartfelt remark made Zen slightly smile. Zen was about to speak when he suddenly heard a miserable scream from the village entrance. Ah! As the horrendous scream echoed through the village, it immediately alarmed all the people in Misty Mountain Village. "Help! The Sun Moon Village has arrived. Many people are killed." These divine citizens were not warriors. As they witnessed the death of people around them, they immediately panicked like ants on a hot pan. The villagers of Misty Mountain Village also wailed in grief as they fled. Panic invaded their minds as they covered their faces with their hands and ran helplessly. Let alone the ordinary divine citizens, even Willie, who was at the spirit transformation realm, had a face full of panic. His eyes reflected his fear. With a scared voice, he said, "They have really come." The only one who remained calm was Zen. Due to his significant experience in combat and war, his battle instincts were well developed. He slightly furrowed his brows and rushed to the top of the house. On his way, he gently lifted the wooden sword on the ground to the air with the tip of his foot. Afterward, Zen leapt up to the top of the house with the wooden sword in his hand. Zen was like a grasshopper as he quickly jumped up to the top of the house. With his high set of skills, his speed was unparalleled. He was as nimble as a cat and didn't make the slightest sound. In a few seconds, he had already reached the village entrance. With a quick glance, he was able to assess the situation of the village. A trace of fury immediately surged out from within his eyes as he saw the village's predicament. At the entrance of Misty Mountain Village, a group of 7 warriors with large cyan sabers blocked the road in unison. Under their feet were 2 divine citizens from Misty Mountain Village. With further inspection, the 2 citizens were already mutilated corpses. One of them had his neck cut off, while the other was directly cut in half. The sight was too horrible to look at. "Humph, our leader gave you 3 months to leave Misty Mountain Village. He was already kind enough to give you a chance to escape. Since you refuse to leave, you will be punished. Don't blame us for being cruel." The one in the lead waved the large cyan saber in his hand and laughed sinisterly. An arrogant expression painted his ugly face. He ruthlessly killed the 2 divine citizens to intimidate and drive away all the people of Misty Mountain Village. "Since you are unwilling to depart, then there is no need to leave anymore. The chief has already said that the sabers in our hands won't become sharper unless we kill continuously. You imbeciles will be the perfect sacrifices for our strength. Guys, other than women, kill everyone else. The elderly and children are no exception." The warrior waved his long saber and led the other 6 warriors to rush in. With a barbaric howl, the warriors infiltrated the village. Zen had stayed in Misty Mountain Village for more than half a month. The people there were simple and hospitable. They were more than kind enough to provide Zen with delicious food and a place to stay. As he witnessed how cruelly the villagers were killed, Zen immediately felt unparalleled wrath in his heart. However, the anger instantly disappeared from his eyes. As a mature warrior, he was able to suppress the emotions in his heart at any time. Most of the villagers fled helplessly in panic, but there were still some brave villagers who stepped forward with spears in their hands. However, they were pitifully weak despite their valor. They also knew they were no match for their opponents. As their arms shook with terror, they hoped for at least an honorable death. Thump, thump, A cyan saber light flashed, and the long spears in the hands of those villagers suddenly broke into two pieces. The villagers became engulfed with despair as their weapons became useless. The warrior in the lead had a cold smile on his face. He raised the cyan saber in his hand again and was about to chop off the head of a villager. Now is the time. Zen descended from the top of the house. Before he landed, he gave the ground an elbow strike. His powerful display immediately caught the attention of the invaders. As his body spun in a circle, the wooden sword in his hand pointed out. The wooden sword weighed more than 10,000 pounds, while the cyan long saber in the Spirit Supreme Realm warrior's hand weighed more than 100,000 pounds. Since Zen couldn't activate his cinnabar field, he naturally could not infuse his chaotic energy into the wooden sword. As such, the wooden sword he held would naturally be inferior to the long sabers of the enemies. However, just as Zen had predicted, the cultivation methods of ordinary warriors were too weak. Even if the enemy warriors were at the Spirit Supreme Realm, their sword skills were still too horrible to look at. Zen simply had an advantage in experience and knowledge. Thump! Zen's wooden sword, like a spirit serpent that had climbed out of the cave, pressed on his opponent's wrist. With his nimble footwork, he quickly gained an advantageous position against the enemy. Although he only used the power of his body, it was still enough to make the Spirit Supreme Realm warrior suffer. The moment the wooden sword pressed on the wrist of the enemy warrior, a bone was immediately heard to snap. The cyan long saber in the warrior's hand fell to the ground with a clang. The warrior covered his wrist and howled. A painful expression was immediately reflected in the warrior's face. His wrist bone had been smashed. In Zen's eyes, the Spirit Supreme Realm warriors were too weak. With his level of martial arts, he could easily toy with them. In the universe, not to mention the warriors at the Spirit Supreme Realm, even those at the Life and Death Realm and the Soul Sea Realm wouldn't change the expressions on their faces if one of their wrists was broken. Even if one of their arms was cut off, they would still be able to calmly face the enemy. However, the warrior at the Spirit Supreme Realm immediately lost his focus and howled painfully after a single bone snapped. As Zen thought of this, he continued to sprint forward. Without any hesitation, he bombarded the enemies with magnificent swordsmanship. The other Spirit Supreme Realm warriors only saw Zen's shadow flash as he attacked towards them. Even with their exceptional perception, Zen eluded their eyes. They brandished their sabers and tried to meet Zen head-on. However, with their weak skills, how could they hit Zen? Zen was like a nimble deer as he continuously dodged the rough blades. Whenever he saw an opportunity, he would immediately thrust his sword against an enemy. Every time Zen pointed out his sword, it would accurately press on the wrist of the opponent. After a bone was heard to crack, a large cyan saber also fell to the ground with a loud bang. Immediately, a sound of anguish would be heard from the victim of Zen's attack. In a few seconds, the 7 Spirit Supreme Realm warriors gave out shrill cries of anguish. Their expressions were full of pain and humiliation. As they suffered intense agony, all they could do was cover their damaged wrists. When the villagers of Misty Mountain Village saw the scene, all of them were stunned. Willie and his group could only gawk as they witnessed Zen's true skills. They had just rushed over but the battle had already ended. "Willie, is my master really a proving godly warrior?" Thompson asked softly as his face was filled with disbelief. Thompson had never seen the strength of proving godly warriors before. Due to the remoteness of their village, he had only heard of it from his brother. However, it seemed that they weren't as powerful as Zen. I'm not sure either. Willie's heart pounded relentlessly. He originally couldn't tell Zen's cultivation level, but as far as he knew, a proving godly warrior couldn't defeat 7 Spirit Supreme Realm warriors in such a short time. However, Zen had easily defeated not just one, but all 7 of them. Was Zen already a true god? But he didn't have the unique aura of a true god. "Brat, who are you? How dare you do this? We are from the Sun Moon Village. Our leader." The head of the group of Spirit Supreme Realm warriors covered his arm and stared at Zen fiercely. Surely, he had discovered that Zen was a proving godly warrior. Therefore, he wanted to scare Zen away. He immediately mentioned the village they were from to incite fear in Zen. A small village like Misty Mountain Village would not have a proving godly warrior. However, before the enemy warrior could finish his words, Zen lifted his foot. Instantly, a stone flew towards the enemy warrior. The stone heavily smashed into the warrior's jaw and crushed it into pieces. The warrior couldn't even scream, let alone speak. Chapter 1740, The Village Leader. A small pebble in the Divine Land weighed about 500 pounds. Combined with Zen's insanely powerful kick, it could shatter anything it hit. The martial artist at the helm couldn't say anything that threatened Zen, so another martial artist beside him wanted to say something. After all, the Sun Moon village backed them, they had no reason to be afraid. But just as that martial artist was about to speak, Zen's foot kicked another stone and hit the martial artist's jaw accurately. Tack. Of course, his jaw had been broken. When the other martial artists saw the scene, they didn't dare to threaten Zen. All of them remained quiet in fear of Zen, who might kick a stone that would smash their faces as well. You guys deal with these people, Zen said indifferently. Indeed, the Misty Mountain Village's people all wanted to kill those warriors and they shared the same sentiments among each other. They killed 2 of us. We have to avenge them. Kill them. Those who had killed others must die. Such was a principle that was universally accepted in the entire world. Therefore, the angry villagers tightly held onto their spears and charged toward those warriors. Although the villagers of the Misty Mountain Village were kind and honest, they didn't show the slightest mercy to the murderers who killed the members of their village. The warriors on the opposite side immediately ran for their lives at the sight of the Misty Mountain villagers despite their broken wrists, courtesy of Zen. However, just as they turned around, Zen stomped his foot on the ground and kicked the stones beneath his feet one by one. The tiny stones that were filled with great momentum were accurately shot at the crooks of the warriors' legs, which caused their bones to break quickly. Soon enough, all of them had fallen to the ground. They couldn't run after their legs had been broken either, so the only thing they could do was to crawl. Because of their slow speed, the members of Misty Mountain Village with their long spears were able to catch up to them and swarmed all the enemy warriors. The rest was history. As for Zen, he did not stay to watch the bloody scene. The truth was that he had rarely killed anyone ever since he had ascended to the upper world. Then again, it wasn't such a cruel thing to kill people if it was in a high-level battle, and besides, the blood that was spilled during such a time wasn't actually that much. After the villagers of the Misty Mountain Village had dealt with the warriors from the Sun Moon Village, they buried their members' corpses. Only then did the furious villagers begin to grow fearful. In reality, no one had actually died even since the start of the conflict between the Misty Mountain Village and the Sun Moon Village. The Sun Moon Village previously just beat up a few people from the Misty Mountain Village and ordered the rest of the villagers to leave their place within a definite time. Who would have thought that when the time came, the Sun Moon Village came over to kill people? If it wasn't for Zen, the Misty Mountain Village's members would have already been massacred by the warriors from the Sun Moon Village. Later that day, the senior members of the Misty Mountain Village gathered together in the largest house. Needless to say, all of them looked troubled as they discussed how to deal with the Sun Moon Village. They killed the warriors of the Sun Moon Village, which meant that they had resisted the Sun Moon Village's attacks. However, they would be in great peril as well if the leader of the Sun Moon Village raided their place and attacked them. Meanwhile, Zen sat in the corner of the house with his eyes tightly shut. He silently circulated his blood to hit the black threads in his cinnabar field. He had been unable to connect with his inner world after being bound by the black threads. During that time, however, he had faintly sensed that something had happened within his inner world, and it made him quite anxious. The time flow rate in his inner world flowed extremely fast. Usually, he pried into his inner world after he cultivated for a few hours to prevent the creatures in it from starting a dispute. There would be some races that occasionally waged a war and wanted to carry out large-scale massacres, but Zen normally stopped them in time. Yet after his cinnabar field had been sealed for a period of time, he had no way of knowing his inner world's progress and whatever happened inside it. He could only figure out such things once he got rid of the black threads. At that moment, the discussion among the villagers of the Misty Mountain Village started to get louder. We might as well leave here. If the warriors of the Sun Moon Village come over to kill us, won't all of us have to die? Leave. Why do we have to leave? From generation to generation, this place has belonged to our Misty Mountain Village. We can't just let them occupy this place. They are just too unreasonable. Our Misty Mountain Village is remote and we are not rich, but why do the people of the Sun Moon Village still want to occupy this place? I think they just want to cause trouble. There was indeed nothing important about their village. In addition, the outside of the Misty Mountain Village was just a flat and wide vegetable patch. What could the Sun Moon Village want from that vegetable patch? What are you afraid of? We can just let that attack and destroy the Sun Moon Village, one villager shouted. When the rest of the villagers heard those words, they all turned to look at Zen. He was their only hope. The question was whether Thad was willing to take such a huge risk to help them fend off the Sun Moon Village. On the other hand, Wooly and Thompson sat by the side without saying anything. Back then, Zen suddenly appeared in their remote mountain village. He taught them martial arts skills and helped them resist the Sun Moon Village's attacks. It was no doubt that he had done a lot for them. Now, they also wanted him to destroy the Sun Moon village, which seemed a bit unreasonable. The entire house suddenly quieted down. No one dared to take the initiative to ask Zen for help. At the corner of the house, Zen looked at the ceiling and said, "I will stay in the Misty Mountain village for another 15 days, and then I will leave. Thanks for treating me in a friendly way these last few days. If the warriors of the Sun Moon village dare to come here again, I will help you punish them." That was the guarantee Zen could give. He did not know much about the Sun Moon village, but he discovered that they weren't actually powerful warriors. Thus, he believed that their leader wasn't that strong as well. Even if Zen couldn't use the chaotic energy for now, it shouldn't be hard for him to deal with them. However, he also guessed that there must be a higher level force behind the Sun Moon village. If such a force was a true god, Zen's current strength wouldn't allow him to effectively fight back. He would be in trouble. He didn't want to enter the divine land and be chased around by a group of true gods. If he wasn't careful, he might lose his life. That was not what he wanted. Once Zen was done speaking, he closed his eyes again. The house was slowly filled with the villagers, whispers once more. Since the warriors of the Sun Moon village had been killed on this day, and their people were known to be domineering, it wouldn't be a surprise if they came to get back at the villagers of the Misty Mountain village the next day. In any case, Zen's promise was already the greatest help to the Misty Mountain village. Nightfall came and clothed the whole village in a blanket of darkness. It was time to rest, but the people of the Misty Mountain village were all nervous. The next day, Zen remained calm and unperturbed. He continued to teach Thompson and Wooly to practice the swordsmanship. As Thompson practiced his movements, his eyes suddenly went wide open and then he quickly told Zen, "Actually, you should leave the Misty Mountain village now." Zen was naturally confused at the boy's words which came out of the blue. "Why do you say that?" he asked with a smile. "The Sun Moon village will not let you and all of the villagers off, and you are the only one who would resist them. I'm afraid." He trailed off and lines of worry began to make their way to his face. Wooly and the others probably had the same thought. They knew that Zen's background was definitely special and that he had been forced to hide in the Misty Mountain village. It was definitely not a wise decision to get involved in a fight with the Sun Moon village. In that way, he would expose himself. The villagers also understood the situation. However, Zen was their only hope, so how could they be willing to let him go? "It's all right," Zen said with a small smile. He already knew that the closest city to the Misty Mountain village was the Mirror City, but it was still hundreds of millions of miles away. The Mirror City was one of the 7 divine cities within the vast sky region. Thus, the true gods would only be found in that place. Zen thought for a while. Even if the Sun Moon village were to ask the true gods for help, they wouldn't be able to find him within a short period of time. Just as the villagers of the Misty Mountain village thought, the people of the Sun Moon village sent out people to check what had happened when they discovered that none of the warriors they had sent to the Misty Mountain village had returned. True enough, they found that 7 warriors had been killed and thrown into the wilderness. Therefore, the leader of Sun Moon village was extremely furious and immediately led his men to attack the Misty Mountain village. Even though their leader was a proven godly warrior, he was still very careful. He knew that it was easy for them to slaughter the people of the Misty Mountain village with the 7 warriors' abilities, but now that those 7 warriors were dead, there must be something strange. When the leader and around 40 of his warriors arrived at the Misty Mountain village, they only saw a young man who sat quietly at the village entrance. Proving godly warrior. Of course, the Sun Moon village leader knew much more than the ordinary warriors because he was a proving godly warrior. He could tell with a single glance that Zen was powerful. Even though Zen had deliberately restrained himself, the aura that he loosely emitted still shocked the leader of the Sun Moon village. "I protect the Misty Mountain village. Please leave this place. Then, I will not kill you," Zen spoke first. However, the warriors around the leader of the Sun Moon village were deeply offended by his words. "Who are you? Just kneel down in front of our leader, and then apologize to him with your life. You are just a mere proving godly warrior, but why are you so reckless? Do you think you are the best in this world? Our leader will make you regret ever coming here. All of you shut up," the leader of the Sun Moon village suddenly yelled. The whole time, his cold gaze was fixed on Zen. After he regained his bearings, he cupped his hands and asked, "Sir, would you care to tell me who your master is? May I have your name?"